have 4 little ones, she said, her voice breaking. The cowboy smiled through the dust. Then I'll make room for 5. When a desperate widow faced losing everything in the unforgiving Montana Territory of 1875, she never expected salvation to come in worn leather boots and a quiet smile. This is the story of Clara Boone, a woman who'd buried loved ones and swore never to risk her heart again, and Wyatt Coulter, a drifter who discovered that home isn't a place you find, it's a family you choose. Stay with us until the end, and comment what city you're watching from so we can see how far this story travels. The first gunshot cracked through Dry Creek's main street at 4:30 on a Tuesday afternoon, and Clara Boone's hands froze mid-motion over the washboard. The second shot followed close behind, and she was already moving, abandoning the suds and shirts, hiking her worn calico skirt above her ankles, running toward home with her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. 3 years. 3 years since she'd become a widow at 23, and still the sound of gunfire turned her blood to ice water. 3 years of raising 4 children alone in a territory where mercy was scarcer than gold, and a woman without a man was viewed as either prey or charity. 3 years of calloused hands, sleepless nights, and a kind of loneliness that settled into your bones like winter cold. The afternoon sun hung low and brutal over the Montana Territory, painting everything in shades of copper and dust. Clara's boots kicked up small clouds as she ran, the medicine basket clutched tight against her chest. Inside, wrapped carefully in brown paper, was the feverfew and willow bark she'd traded half a week's washing for. Little Ellie needed it, had needed it for 2 days now, while the fever climbed and Clara's prayers grew more desperate. The shooting had nothing to do with her, she told herself. Just cowboys drinking away their pay or miners settling scores. It always was. Dry Creek in 1875 was the kind of town where violence bloomed as regular as sagebrush, where the marshal looked the other way if you crossed the right palms with silver, where women like Clara learned to keep their heads down and their doors locked. She burst through the crooked door of her cabin, hardly more than a shack really, with its patched roof and stone chimney that smoked more than it drew, and found the scene exactly as she'd left it. Tom, her eldest at 8 years old, sat vigilant beside the hearth, where little Ellie lay wrapped in every blanket they owned. The twins, Abby and Ben, 6 years old and mirror images of each other, huddled together near the far wall, their eyes wide and frightened. "Mama!" Abby rushed forward, and Clara caught her daughter with one arm, pulling her close. "I heard shots," Tom said, his young voice trying for steady and almost making it. He had his father's dark hair, his father's serious eyes. Too serious for a boy who should have been fishing in the creek and stealing pie from windowsills. "I know, sweetheart. It's all right. Just stay inside." Clara moved to the hearth, kneeling beside Ellie's small form. At 4 years old, her youngest was tiny for her age, a delicate thing with wispy blonde hair and her mother's green eyes, currently glassy with fever. Clara pressed her palm to Ellie's forehead and felt the heat radiating from her daughter's skin like a banked fire. "I got the medicine," Clara whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Her hands shook slightly as she unwrapped the brown paper, measuring out the herbs with the kind of careful precision that comes from knowing you can't afford mistakes. She'd learned frontier medicine the hard way, through necessity and loss, through watching her husband James waste away while the nearest real doctor was 3 days' ride in good weather. She prepared the tea in the battered tin pot, her movements automatic while her mind raced through calculations. The washing she'd left behind needed finishing, Mrs. Henderson's linens, the bartender's shirts, that gambler's fancy vest. Tomorrow she had the hotel's sheets to collect, and there was mending to be done for the pastor's wife. If she worked through the night again, maybe she could keep them fed through the week. Maybe. "Mama, I'm hungry." Ben's small voice cut through her thoughts. Clara's chest tightened. She'd given them the last of the beans at midday, scraping the pot to fill their bowls while she took nothing for herself. The cornmeal was running low, and the salt pork was gone entirely. Tomorrow was Sunday. No washing on the Sabbath, which meant no income. The mercantile owner, Mr. Sutton, had extended her credit about as far as his generosity stretched, and his generosity had limits as firm as his prices were high. "There's a bit of bread," she said, forcing brightness into her voice. "And I'll make something good tomorrow. Tom, honey, could you get your brother and sister that bread? And maybe tell them the story about the clever rabbit?" Tom nodded solemnly, accepting the responsibility. At 8 years old, he'd become her lieutenant, her helper, the little man of the house. It broke her heart even as it filled her with fierce pride. Clara coaxed the feverfew tea into Ellie's mouth, one careful sip at a time, whispering encouragements. "That's my brave girl. Just a little more. It's going to make you feel better, I promise." Ellie's eyes fluttered open, unfocused. "Papa?" she whispered, and Clara's throat closed up entirely. "No, baby, it's Mama. Papa's gone, remember? But I'm here. I'm right here." She'd been barely walking when James died. Sometimes Clara wondered if Ellie really remembered her father, or if she'd just constructed memories from the stories Clara told. Tales of a gentle man who'd loved his family, who'd worked himself nearly to death carving a farm from stubborn soil, who'd caught a fever one autumn and never recovered. Clara had smoothed those stories' edges over time, omitting the parts about his last painful days, about the way he'd apologized for leaving them, about how his hands had clutched hers while he begged her to be strong. She'd been strong. God help her, she'd had no choice but to be strong. The gunfire had stopped outside, replaced by the usual evening sounds of Dry Creek, laughter spilling from saloons, the creak of wagon wheels, horses neighing in corrals, someone playing a fiddle badly. Normal life, for certain values of normal. Clara stayed beside Ellie through sunset, sponging her daughter's forehead with cool water, checking her pulse, praying to a God who seemed to have turned his face away from widows and orphans in the Montana Territory. She'd been raised to believe in divine providence, in the idea that the Lord looked after his flock, but 3 years of scraping by had worn her faith thin as her eldest's outgrown trousers. "Tell us the story, Mama," Abby called from across the room, where Tom had settled the twins with the promised bread and was doing his best to distract them. Clara glanced up. 3 pairs of eyes watched her, hopeful, trusting, believing absolutely that their mother could fix anything, solve any problem, chase away any darkness. The weight of that trust was heavier than any laundry basket she'd ever carried. "Which story?" she asked. "The one about you and Papa," Ben said. "When you first met." A smile ghosted across Clara's lips despite everything. "You've heard that story 100 times. We want to hear it 100 more," Tom said quietly. So Clara told it again. The story that had become family legend. How she'd been traveling west with her father's wagon train at 17, heading for the Oregon Territory and a new life. How James Boone had been part of the group, a serious young man of 22 with dreams of farming and family. How they'd courted carefully under her father's watchful eye. How James had asked permission to marry her in a dawn meeting while the camp still slept. How they'd wed under the vast Montana sky with wildflowers in her hair and promises on their lips. She left out the parts about her father dying of cholera 2 weeks later, about how they'd decided to stay in Montana Territory instead of continuing on, about the years of hard work and harder winters, about the cabin they'd built with their own hands, and the children they'd made with careful hope. She left out the ending too, the part where it had all crumbled to dust, leaving her alone with 4 mouths to feed and no earthly idea how to keep going. The children fell asleep one by one as full dark descended. Tom stayed awake longest, fighting to keep his eyes open because he thought that's what a man should do. Clara finally told him it was all right to rest, that she'd keep watch, that she'd wake him if anything changed. He surrendered to sleep reluctantly, curled up near his sisters like a guardian. Alone in the firelight, Clara allowed herself 5 minutes of weakness. She let her head drop into her hands. She let the tears come silently, carefully, where no one could see. She let herself feel the full weight of impossible responsibility, of bone-deep exhaustion, of the terror that lived in her chest like a second heartbeat, the terror that she wasn't going to be enough, that her best efforts wouldn't save them, that one day she'd wake up and not know how to keep going. 5 minutes. Then she wiped her eyes, straightened her spine, and got back to work. The night passed in the familiar rhythm of crisis, checking Ellie's fever, which seemed to finally be breaking, thank God. Finishing what mending she could by firelight, squinting at stitches until her eyes burned, planning tomorrow's chores, next week's hustle, trying to figure how to stretch the money she had coming until the money she needed arrived. By the time dawn painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, Clara had been awake for nearly 30 hours. Ellie's fever had dropped at last, and the little girl slept peacefully, her breathing even and clear. Clara allowed herself a moment of gratitude so intense it felt like praying, then set about making breakfast from the heels of bread and some wild onions she'd foraged the day before. "Mama?" Tom appeared at her elbow as she worked. The water barrel's almost empty. Of course it was. Clara pressed her eyes shut briefly, then nodded. "I'll fetch more from the creek." "I can go—" "No." She softened it with a smile, touching his cheek. "You stay with the others. I'll be quick." The morning air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of sage and pine. Clara walked the familiar path to the creek that ran behind the scattered collection of buildings that made up Dry Creek, carrying their 2 battered buckets. Her body ached in about 17 places: back, shoulders, hands, feet. But she'd learned to ignore such complaints. Pain was just another constant, like hunger, like worry, like the particular exhaustion that came from carrying everything alone. The creek ran clear and cold, fed by snowmelt from the mountains that rose purple and majestic in the distance. Clara loved this spot, loved the sound of water over stones, the way morning light caught in the current, the brief illusion of peace it offered. She'd found herself coming here more often lately, stealing minutes to just breathe, to remember who she'd been before life had ground her down to survival instincts and desperate prayers. She was filling the second bucket when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Clara's shoulders tensed automatically. A woman alone was always vulnerable, and morning isolation made it worse. She kept her eyes down, focusing on the water, hoping whoever it was would simply pass by. The hoofbeats stopped. Leather creaked as someone dismounted. "Morning, ma'am?" The voice was male, deep, with the slow drawl of someone who'd spent serious time in the saddle. "Didn't mean to startle you." Clara straightened slowly, one hand still on the bucket, ready to run if she needed to. She'd learned caution the hard way, learned that men in frontier towns often thought a widow was an invitation, that kindness could turn predatory in a heartbeat, that trust was a luxury women like her couldn't afford. The man standing 20 feet downstream was tall, easily over 6 feet, with the kind of lean, weathered build that spoke of years in the saddle. He wore dusty trail clothes, a worn leather vest over a blue shirt, and boots that had seen serious miles. A gun belt rode low on his hips, but his hands were nowhere near the weapon. Instead, he held his hat in them, turning it slowly, almost nervous. His face caught her off guard. He wasn't young, probably in his early 30s, she guessed, but there was something unguarded in his expression that didn't match the hard-bitten look of most men in these parts. Blue eyes, dusty brown hair needing a cut, a few days of beard stubble, and something in his features that suggested quiet competence rather than swagger. "Just watering my horse," he continued when she didn't speak, nodding toward the bay gelding drinking downstream. "Didn't mean to crowd your stream." Clara found her voice, keeping it neutral. "It's not my stream. Water belongs to everyone." "Fair point." He offered a small smile, tentative. "Still, I could have gone further down. Wasn't thinking." They stood in awkward silence for a moment. Clara studied him with the assessment skills she'd developed, looking for signs of meanness, cruelty, the particular kind of entitlement that made certain men dangerous. She saw none of it, but that didn't mean much. Some men hid their true nature well. "You new to Dry Creek?" she asked finally, because the question was safer than standing there silent. "Just rode in yesterday evening. Name's Wyatt Coulter." He took a half step forward, then seemed to think better of it, and stayed where he was. "Looking to settle somewhere, maybe. Heard there might be land available around here." "There's always land," Clara said flatly. "Whether you can make anything of it is another question entirely." Something flickered in Wyatt's expression, understanding maybe or recognition of hard truth. "I expect you're right about that, ma'am." "It's Mrs. Boone," she corrected automatically, then wondered why she bothered. The Mrs. was armor, a shield against unwanted attention, a reminder that she'd belonged to someone once even if she didn't anymore. "Mrs. Boone," Wyatt repeated, respectful. "Pleasure to meet you, though I'm sorry for intruding on your morning." He was being polite, genuinely polite, without the edge of mockery or insinuation she'd learned to expect. Clara didn't know quite what to do with that. "You planning to settle?" she heard herself ask. "Or just passing through?" Wyatt glanced around, at the mountains, the creek, the vast open territory that stretched in every direction. "Maybe."
Depends what I find worth staying for. There was something in the way he said it, something wistful that caught Clara off guard. She recognized it somehow, that searching for home, that hope that maybe the next place would be the one where you finally got to stop running, stop surviving, and actually live. She shook the thought away. Other people's hopes weren't her concern. She had 4 children who needed breakfast and laundry that needed finishing, and a life that had no room for contemplating mysterious cowboys with kind eyes and polite manners. Well, Mr. Coulter, I hope you find what you're looking for. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. Clara hefted both buckets, ignoring the way the weight pulled at her shoulders. Let me help you with those. Wyatt moved forward, and Clara took a sharp step back, sloshing water. No. He froze mid-stride, hands raised slightly. I'm sorry. I didn't mean... I just thought... I can manage. Her voice came out harder than she'd intended, but it was necessary. Accepting help meant accepting obligation, and obligation from men always came with strings attached. She'd learned that lesson thoroughly. Wyatt nodded slowly, something like disappointment crossing his features. Of course. My apologies, Mrs. Boone. Claire didn't answer, just turned and walked away, bucket swinging. She could feel his gaze on her back, but he didn't follow, didn't call out, didn't do any of the things she'd half expected. When she glanced back from the edge of the tree line, he was crouched beside the creek, refilling his canteen, his horse cropping grass nearby. Just a passing cowboy, she told herself. Probably be gone by next week. The thought should have been comforting. Instead, it left her with an odd hollowness she didn't want to examine. Back at the cabin, she found chaos. Abby had knocked over the tin of cornmeal reaching for something, and a fine dusting of yellow covered half the floor. Ben was crying because Abby had yelled at him for startling her. Tom was trying to referee while also attempting to heat up the pathetic breakfast Clara had left warming by the fire. And Ellie, mercifully, was still sleeping peacefully. All right, everyone stop, Clara said firmly, setting down the buckets. Abby, crying doesn't help anyone. Ben, it was an accident. Tom, thank you for trying, but let me handle breakfast. She salvaged what she could of the cornmeal, enough for one more meager pan of cornbread if she stretched it with extra water. The rest she swept up carefully, trying not to think about the waste, about how that represented a meal or two they'd now lost. They ate breakfast in relative silence, the children still subdued from the morning's drama. Clara watched them, Tom trying to make his portion last, Abby and Ben leaning against each other for comfort, Ellie finally awake and managing a few bites before her eyes drifted shut again. Her babies. Her reason for everything. Mama, can we go to the creek today? Ben asked hopefully. It's so hot. Clara's first instinct was to say no. The creek meant running into people, meant exposure, meant risks. But she looked at their hopeful faces and remembered they were still children, that they deserved some joy even in the midst of hardship. Maybe this afternoon, she said slowly, if your chores are done and Ellie's still feeling better. The twins lit up like lanterns. Even Tom smiled slightly, that rare expression that reminded Clara he was still just a boy, not the little man she'd been forcing him to become. But first there was work. Always work. Clara spent the morning finishing Mrs. Henderson's linens, scrubbing, wringing, hanging them to dry on the rope line she'd strung between 2 posts. The sun climbed higher, turning the world into a furnace, and sweat dripped down her spine as she worked. Her hands were raw, her back screaming, but she pushed through because she had no choice. She was hanging the last sheet when a shadow fell across the line. Clara spun, heart jumping, and found herself face to face with Wyatt Coulter again. Didn't mean to sneak up, he said quickly, taking a step back. That seemed to be his default, maintaining distance, being careful not to crowd. I was just passing by and thought... He paused, looking suddenly uncertain. This is going to sound presumptuous. Then maybe don't say it, Claire replied, more sharply than necessary. Her nerves were frayed from lack of sleep and constant worry, and having the stranger appear twice in one day felt invasive somehow. Wyatt ducked his head. Fair enough. I'll be going then. He turned to leave, and Clara felt something twist in her chest. Guilt, maybe. He'd done nothing but be polite, and she'd been nothing but prickly in return. James would have been disappointed in her. He'd always said meeting hostility with kindness was the Christian way, that you never knew when you might be entertaining angels unaware. "Wait," she called out before she could stop herself. "What were you going to say?" Wyatt looked back, surprise flickering across his features. "I was going to offer to help. With whatever you've got that needs doing." He gestured vaguely at the laundry line, the cabin, the general air of overwhelming burden that probably clung to her like smoke. "Just water and soap, seems like. I can handle that." Clara almost laughed, bitter and tired. "And why would you do that?" "Because you look like you could use a hand, and I've got 2 of them with nothing particular to do." "Nothing's free, Mr. Coulter. What would you want in return?" The question hung between them, loaded with the weight of every transaction Clara had learned to expect in this harsh territory. She watched his face carefully, looking for the catch, the angle, the moment when kindness would reveal itself as transaction. But Wyatt just looked confused. "Want? Nothing. I'm offering help because—" He struggled for words. "Because it's the decent thing to do? Because I was raised to help folks when they need it? Nobody helps for nothing." "Well, maybe I'm nobody then." He said it without rancor, just stating fact. "Look, Mrs. Boone, I get it. You don't know me. You've got no reason to trust me. But I'm not asking for anything except maybe to be useful for a few hours. If that's too uncomfortable, I'll tip my hat and move along, and you'll never see me again." Clara studied him in the harsh afternoon light. She was so tired. Tired of doing everything alone, tired of the constant grind, tired of being suspicious of everyone because she had to be. And there was something in Wyatt Coulter's face, something genuine and kind and lonely that echoed her own loneliness back at her. "There's laundry," she heard herself say. "A lot of it. And the creek water needs hauling, and—" She gestured helplessly at the overwhelming list of tasks that never ended. Wyatt's face lit up with a smile that transformed him entirely. "Then let's get to it." He rolled up his sleeves and got to work without further discussion, following her lead as she showed him how she wanted things done. To Clara's surprise, he didn't balk at the women's work, didn't complain about the tedium or the physicality of it. He just worked. Scrubbing shirts in the second washboard she'd cobbled together from scraps, his hands moving with careful competence, asking questions when he wasn't sure, rather than assuming. Within an hour, Clara had finished what usually took her until sunset. They worked in silence mostly, the kind that didn't feel awkward but almost comfortable. Occasionally, Wyatt would make an observation, commenting on the quality of the water, asking about different stains, mentioning that his mother used to add lavender to the wash water for scent. Small things, nothing profound, but it created a rhythm between them that felt almost normal. The children emerged around midday, drawn by the presence of a stranger. They hung back at first, shy and uncertain, clustering near the cabin door. But Wyatt noticed them immediately. "Hello there," he called out, keeping his voice gentle. "You must be Mrs. Boone's young'uns." Tom stood protectively in front of his siblings. "Yes, sir, I'm Tom. These are my sisters Abby, and that's Ben. He's a boy even though they look the same. And that's Ellie inside, but she's been sick." "Nice to meet you all." Wyatt wrung out a shirt and hung it carefully. "Tom, that's a mighty responsible position you've got, looking after your family like that." Tom straightened slightly, pride flickering across his young face. "Mama says a man takes care of his own." "Your mama sounds wise." Clara felt her throat tighten at the easy way Wyatt spoke to her son. No condescension, no dismissal of Tom's importance, just respect offered freely. So many men treated children as nuisances at best. "Mr. Coulter," Abby ventured forward, her natural boldness winning over shyness. "What's that on your belt?" Clara glanced over and saw Abby pointing at what looked like a coin hanging from Wyatt's gun belt, silver, catching the light as he moved. Wyatt unhooked it carefully and crouched down to Abby's level, holding it out. "That's a silver dollar. Had it most of my life. My pa gave it to me when I was about your age." "It's pretty," Abby breathed, touching it with one tentative finger. "It is," Wyatt agreed. "Your papa ever give you something special?" The question was innocent, but Clara saw her children's faces fall. Tom's jaw tightened. Abby's eyes welled up. "Our papa's dead," Ben said matter-of-factly, with the bluntness children sometimes deployed against grief. He died when I was 3. I don't remember him much. Something shifted in Wyatt's expression. Understanding, sympathy, something deeper that looked like shared pain. I'm sorry to hear that. I bet he was a good man. He was, Clara said softly, surprised to find herself joining the conversation. He was the best of men. Wyatt looked up at her, and their eyes met across the laundry lines. In that moment, Clara felt something pass between them. Recognition, maybe. A shared understanding of loss, of carrying on despite it, of the particular loneliness that came from having loved and lost. He stood smoothly, rehooking the silver dollar. Well, I expect he'd be proud of all of you. You're clearly doing him honor. The simple statement shouldn't have meant anything, but Clara felt tears prick her eyes and had to turn away quickly, pretending to adjust a sheet on the line. Can you show me your horse? Tom asked, warming up to the stranger who'd respected his father's memory. Sure can, if your mama says it's all right. Clara nodded, not quite trusting her voice. Wyatt led the children toward where his bay gelding was tied in the shade, and Clara heard him explaining about horses, about care and feeding, his voice patient and kind. She watched them, this stranger with her children, this cowboy who'd appeared out of nowhere and was showing her babies small kindnesses for no reason she could fathom. Warning bells should have been ringing. Instead, she just felt grateful, and that scared her almost more than anything else. By early afternoon, they'd finished everything. The laundry hung clean and bright in the sun, the water barrels were full, and Wyatt had even taken it upon himself to fix a loose board on the cabin's front step without being asked. Clara stood on her porch, surveying the results, hardly able to believe how much they'd accomplished. What usually took her 2 full days had been done in hours. She felt lighter somehow, less crushed under the weight of impossible expectations. Thank you, she said to Wyatt, who was preparing to mount his horse. Thank you. He smiled, that warm, genuine expression that transformed his whole face. It was nothing, just water and soap, like I said. It wasn't nothing to me. They looked at each other for a moment, something unspoken but significant passing between them. Clara felt her chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't quite name, wasn't sure she wanted to name. Mr. Coulter, she heard herself say, we don't have much, but I've got some cornbread left from breakfast. Would you like some before you go? Wyatt's smile widened. Mrs. Boone, I'd be honored. They sat on her porch, not close, maintaining respectful distance, while Clara served up the cornbread. It wasn't fancy, was barely more than flour and water held together with hope, but Wyatt ate it like it was the finest meal he'd ever had. This is good, he said, and sounded like he meant it. Liar, Clara replied, but there was no heat in it. It's terrible, and you know it. Okay, maybe it's a little dry, but it's made with care, and that counts for something. The children clustered around, drawn by food and the novelty of a guest. Ellie, finally awake and feeling better, peered out from behind Tom with wide, curious eyes. That must be Miss Ellie, Wyatt said gently. I heard you weren't feeling well. You better now? Ellie nodded shyly, thumb in her mouth, a habit Clara had been trying to break her of but didn't have the heart to correct today. I'm glad. Being sick's no fun. Mr. Coulter, Tom said seriously, are you going to stay in Dry Creek? It was the question Clara had been afraid to ask, though she wasn't entirely sure why it mattered. Wyatt glanced at Clara, then back at Tom. I'm thinking about it. I bought the old Holloway place this morning, the spread about a mile north of here. Figure to fix it up, maybe run some cattle, build something that lasts. The Holloway place? Clara couldn't hide her surprise. But that's practically falling down. Old man Holloway died 2 years back, and it's been empty since. I know, that's why it was cheap. Wyatt grinned ruefully. I'm not afraid of hard work, and I've been drifting too long. Time to put down roots somewhere. Why here? The question came out before Clara could stop it. Wyatt was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant. Because I rode through yesterday evening, and this place felt right somehow. Can't explain it better than that. Sometimes you just know when you've found where you're supposed to be. Clara understood that feeling, had felt it herself once, years ago,
when she and James had decided to stay in Montana Territory instead of continuing west, before everything had gone wrong. "Well," she said carefully, "if you're staying, I suppose we'll be neighbors." "I suppose we will be," Wyatt agreed, and the pleased note in his voice was unmistakable. He left as the sun began its descent toward the mountains, tipping his hat to Clara and waving to the children, who'd clustered on the porch to see him off. Clara watched him ride away, that tall figure on the bay horse, and felt something shift inside her, something she'd thought died along with James, something that felt dangerously close to hope. "I like him, Mama," Abby announced. "He's nice." "He's just a man passing through," Clara said automatically, the lie tasting bitter. "But he said he's staying," Tom pointed out. "He bought the Holloway place. Plans change. People leave." Clara's voice was harder than she'd intended, but she needed the reminder as much as her children did. Needed to remember that depending on anyone except herself was foolishness, that trust was a luxury they couldn't afford. But that night, after the children were asleep and Clara sat alone with her mending, she found herself thinking about blue eyes and quiet smiles, about a stranger who'd asked for nothing and given help freely, about the sound of laughter that had filled her cabin for the first time in longer than she could remember. It meant nothing, she told herself firmly. One afternoon of help didn't mean anything. Come tomorrow, she'd be back to managing alone, back to the endless grind, back to being the widow Clara Boone who needed no one and asked for nothing. But the next morning, when she walked to the creek with her water buckets, she found herself almost hoping to see a tall figure watering his horse. And when Wyatt Coulter appeared as the sun broke over the mountains, leading his bay gelding to the water's edge with that careful, respectful way he had of moving, Clara felt her heart do something complicated and terrifying. "Morning, Mrs. Boone," he called out, that warm smile breaking across his face like sunrise. "Mr. Coulter," she replied, trying to keep her voice neutral and probably failing. "I was wondering," he said, turning his hat in his hands again, "if maybe you could use another pair of hands today. I'm heading to my place to start working on it, but I thought I'd check first. If you've got more washing or anything that needs doing..." Clara should have said no, should have thanked him politely and sent him on his way, maintained the walls she'd built so carefully around herself and her children, should have remembered that accepting help meant risk, meant vulnerability, meant the possibility of pain she'd sworn never to endure again. "There's always washing," she heard herself say instead, "if you're offering." Wyatt's smile could have lit the whole territory. "I'm offering." And as they walked back toward her cabin together, the morning sun warm on their faces and the sound of the creek bubbling behind them, Clara allowed herself to wonder, just for a moment, if maybe, possibly, she'd been wrong about hope. Maybe it wasn't dead after all. Maybe it had just been waiting for a cowboy with dusty boots and kind eyes to remind her what it felt like. Maybe, just maybe, the story wasn't over yet. The days that followed developed a rhythm that Clara hadn't experienced since before James died. A pattern of shared labor that made the impossible feel merely difficult, that transformed solitary struggle into something that almost resembled partnership. Wyatt showed up every morning just after dawn, appearing at the creek or the cabin with that same careful courtesy, always asking if she needed help, always accepting whatever answer she gave without complaint or judgment. Most mornings, Clara said yes. She told herself it was practical, that refusing assistance just to maintain pride was foolish when she had 4 children depending on her. She told herself it meant nothing beyond convenience. She was lying, and somewhere deep down, she knew it. On the 3rd morning, Wyatt arrived with a burlap sack slung over his shoulder. "Brought some supplies from the mercantile," he said, setting it on her porch with studied casualness. "Picked up too much by accident, and it'll just go to waste at my place." Clara opened the sack and found flour, salt pork, dried beans, sugar, coffee, and a small jar of honey. Her throat tightened. This wasn't accidental surplus. This was a week's worth of groceries. Maybe more. This was charity wrapped in fiction, kindness disguised as mistake. "Mr. Coulter." "Wyatt," he interrupted gently. "If we're going to be neighbors, seems like we should use first names. And before you refuse, just consider that it really would go to waste. I'm one man, and I bought for... well, I wasn't thinking clearly in the store. Old habits." The way he said it, that catch in his voice on old habits, made Clara look at him more closely.
She saw the shadow cross his face, the tightness around his eyes that spoke of remembered loss. She'd worn that expression herself often enough to recognize it in someone else. "Old habits from what?" she asked quietly. Wyatt was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "I was married once, 5 years back. Sarah was her name. She died in childbirth. And the baby didn't make it either. A daughter. We were going to name her Rose." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with grief that Clara understood in her bones. She'd heard hundreds of similar stories in the territory. Women dying to bring life into the world, babies too fragile for the harsh conditions, families shattered by losses that should never have been, but were so terribly common. "I'm sorry," Clara said, inadequate words for adequate pain. "Thank you. It was a long time ago, but sometimes I still buy supplies like I'm feeding 2 people instead of 1, like she's still there waiting for me to come home." Wyatt cleared his throat, embarrassed by his own vulnerability. "Anyway, I'd be grateful if you'd take these things. It would ease my mind knowing they're not being wasted." Clara wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain her independence, her pride, her careful distance from this man who was starting to matter more than he should. But she thought of Tom's thin frame, of the way the twins never complained even when they were clearly still hungry, of Ellie who needed good food to fully recover. She thought of Wyatt's dead wife and lost daughter, of grief that made you buy groceries for ghosts. "All right," she said finally. "Thank you, Wyatt. It's very generous." His smile was sad but genuine. "Sarah would have liked you, I think. She always said taking care of people was the most important work there was." They worked together that morning with a new understanding between them, not just widow and stranger anymore, but 2 people who'd survived loss and were still trying to figure out how to live with the holes it left behind. Clara found herself talking more easily, mentioning small things about James, about their life together, things she hadn't spoken aloud in years because there'd been no one to tell. "He always sang while he worked," she said at one point, scrubbing a stubborn stain from a shirt. "Terribly off key, mind you, but he said work went faster with music, even bad music." "Sarah couldn't cook to save her life," Wyatt offered with a soft laugh. "Burned water once, I swear to God, but she tried so hard and she never gave up on anything, stubborn as a mule in the best possible way. James was stubborn too, thought he could farm rocks if he just worked hard enough." Clara's voice caught. "He worked himself to death trying to prove it." "It's not fair," Wyatt said quietly. "The good one's dying while—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Clara understood. While mean, worthless people seemed to go on forever. While children were left without parents. While love got punished for no reason anyone could explain. "No," she agreed. "It's not fair at all." By noon, they'd finished her washing and moved on to other tasks that needed doing. Wyatt fixed the sagging fence around her small vegetable garden, replaced some rotted boards on the chicken coop, and rehung her door, which had been sitting crooked for months. He worked with quiet competence, refusing payment beyond the cornbread and weak coffee Clara insisted he take at midday. The children gravitated toward him like moths to lamplight. Tom followed him around asking endless questions about ranching, cattle, horses, and life on the trail. The twins competed for his attention, showing off their meager treasures, Abby's collection of interesting rocks, Ben's carefully carved stick horse. Even Ellie, still recovering but much improved, toddled after him calling Mr. Wyatt in her piping voice, and Wyatt would scoop her up gently, letting her perch on his shoulders while he worked. Watching him with her children did something dangerous to Clara's carefully guarded heart. He was patient in ways she'd forgotten men could be, kind without expectation of reward, present in a way that made each child feel seen and valued. Tom especially bloomed under Wyatt's attention, standing taller, smiling more readily, asking questions with the eager curiosity of a boy who'd been forced to be too adult too soon. "Mr. Wyatt," Tom said one afternoon, watching Wyatt mend a broken harness with careful stitches, "could you teach me how to do that?" "Sure can. Come here and I'll show you." Wyatt made space for Tom beside him, guiding the boy's hands through the process, praising each clumsy stitch. "That's good work, Tom. You've got steady hands. That's important in a man." Tom glowed under the approval, and Clara had to turn away quickly before anyone saw the tears in her eyes. Her son needed this, needed a man's guidance and attention, needed someone to show him the things a father should teach. She'd done her best, but there were limits to what she could provide alone. Later that evening, after Wyatt had left and the children were settled for the night, Tom approached Clara with unusual seriousness. "Mama, is Mr. Wyatt going to be around for a while?" Clara looked up from her mending. "I don't know, sweetheart. He says he's staying, but people's plans change sometimes." "I hope he stays." Tom's voice was small, vulnerable in a way he rarely allowed himself to be. "It's nice having him around. It feels a little bit like when Papa was alive. Not the same, but better than just us." The words pierced Clara's chest like arrows. "Are you not happy with just us?" she asked carefully, trying to keep hurt out of her voice. "I am, Mama. You're the best mama in the whole world, and I love my sisters. But sometimes," Tom struggled for words, "sometimes it's hard being the only man. And Mr. Wyatt, he makes it feel like maybe I don't have to carry everything by myself." Clara pulled her son into a fierce hug, her throat too tight for words. She'd known, abstractly, that she was asking too much of Tom, that he'd shouldered burdens no 8-year-old should carry. But hearing him articulate it broke something open inside her. "You shouldn't have to carry everything," she whispered into his hair. "You're still just a boy, Tom. You deserve to be just a boy." "But if I'm not the man of the house, who will be?" It was the question Clara had no answer for, the one that kept her awake nights wrestling with impossible choices. Her son needed to be a child, but they also needed someone strong enough to help carry their burdens. She couldn't be both mother and father, couldn't fill all the gaps James had left behind. Maybe that's why she didn't send Wyatt away, even though every instinct screamed that depending on him was dangerous. Maybe that's why she let him keep coming back, day after day, weaving himself slowly into the fabric of their lives. A week turned into 2, and Wyatt became a fixture, expected, anticipated, quietly essential. He brought wild berries he'd found while working on his property, showing the children where the best patches grew. He carved little toys during breaks, a wooden horse for Ben, a doll for Abby, a bird that actually whistled for Ellie. For Tom, he made a proper pocket knife, small but functional, and taught the boy how to use it safely. "A man should have a good knife," Wyatt said seriously, treating the gift with appropriate ceremony. "And he should know how to handle it with respect. Can you do that, Tom?" "Yes, sir," Tom breathed, cradling the knife like precious treasure. Clara watched the exchange with mixed feelings. Part of her was grateful. This was exactly what Tom needed. Part of her was terrified because Tom was getting attached. They were all getting attached. And what would happen when Wyatt left? Because he would leave, eventually. Everyone did. But Wyatt kept not leaving. He showed up the next morning and the next and the next, bringing his quiet presence and steady hands, asking nothing except to be useful. He worked on his own property, too. Clara could see the Holloway place transforming slowly from derelict wreck to something approaching habitable. New fence posts went up, the roof got patched. The barn that had been leaning dangerously got straightened and reinforced. "You're making real progress over there," Clara commented one afternoon, watching Wyatt wash up after a day of labor. "Getting there," he agreed. "Still a long way from finished, but it's starting to feel like it might actually be a home someday." "Is that what you're looking for? A home?" Wyatt was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "I've been drifting since Sarah died. Worked ranches all over, Colorado, Wyoming, even down Texas way for a while. Good places, good people, but nothing ever felt right. Nowhere felt like somewhere I wanted to stay. Until here." "What makes here different?" Clara asked, though she wasn't entirely sure she wanted to know the answer. Wyatt looked at her directly, his blue eyes serious. "Honestly, I'm not completely sure. Something about this place, these people, you and your children. It feels like maybe I could stop running, like maybe there's a reason to put down roots." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning Clara wasn't ready to examine. She deflected quickly. "The children have certainly taken to you." "The feeling's mutual." Wyatt's expression softened. "They're good kids, Clara. You've raised them well, all by yourself. That's remarkable." It was the first time he'd used her first name, and the intimacy of it sent a small shock through her system. She should correct him, reestablish boundaries, But the word had sounded right in his voice, warm and respectful and somehow tender. "I had no choice but to raise them well," she said instead. "They're all I have." "You're stronger than you think," Wyatt said quietly. "I see it. The way you carry everything, the way you keep going no matter what. That takes a kind of courage most people never have to find." Clara felt her eyes sting with unexpected tears. No one had called her strong before. Stubborn, maybe, difficult, too independent for her own good. But strong? That felt like a gift she hadn't known she needed. "Thank you," she managed. They stood there in the fading light, something shifting between them, some barrier crumbling, some connection deepening. Clara felt it and was terrified by it and couldn't seem to make herself step back from the edge she was approaching. The first storm came in late July, rolling down from the mountains with summer fury. Clara saw the clouds building all afternoon, great towering things dark as bruises, pregnant with rain and lightning. She rushed to get laundry down from the lines, racing against the wind that was already pulling at the sheets with greedy fingers. She was fighting with a particularly stubborn bedsheet, the wind whipping it around her like a sail, when strong hands reached past her to grab the other end. Wyatt had appeared from nowhere, his horse tied hastily near the cabin, and together they wrestled the laundry to safety. The rain hit just as they reached the porch, a sudden deluge that turned the world to water. Lightning cracked overhead, and thunder followed close enough to shake the ground. Clara stood gasping on her porch, soaked through despite their speed, and turned to find Wyatt equally drenched beside her. And then she laughed. It bubbled up from somewhere deep, unexpected, and irrepressible. Real laughter, the kind she hadn't experienced in years, because they looked ridiculous, dripping and disheveled, clutching armfuls of damp laundry like refugees from a flood. Because the storm was magnificent in its fury. Because Wyatt had appeared exactly when she needed him, as he seemed to do with alarming frequency. Because something in her chest had cracked open, and joy was leaking through. Wyatt stared at her for a moment, then started laughing too, deep, genuine laughter that transformed his whole face. They stood there like fools in the rain, laughing for no good reason and every reason, while thunder crashed and lightning painted the sky electric white. "You can't ride back in this," Clara said finally, gasping for breath, still smiling. "You'll drown before you reach home." "I suppose I'll have to wait it out then," Wyatt agreed, wringing water from his hat. They went inside where the children clustered around with wide eyes. "Mama, you're all wet," Ellie exclaimed with the obvious observation children specialized in. "The storm caught us," Clara explained, toweling her hair. "Mr. Wyatt's going to stay until it passes." She set Wyatt up by the fire with a blanket and some coffee, trying to ignore how domestic the scene felt, how right it seemed to have him there, dripping on her floor, making her children giggle with exaggerated complaints about the weather. The storm raged for hours, showing no signs of stopping. Rain hammered the roof, wind howled around the cabin's corners, and lightning illuminated the windows in brilliant flashes. It would have been frightening, except Wyatt kept the children entertained with stories, tales of his years on the trail, sanitized versions of his adventures that made cowboy life sound romantic and exciting rather than hard and dangerous. "Tell us about the time you fought the bear," Ben demanded, having heard this story twice already and wanting it again. "Well, I didn't exactly fight it," Wyatt clarified. "More like we surprised each other and both decided we'd rather be somewhere else. But that bear, he was huge, stood at least this tall." He gestured dramatically, and the children gasped appropriately. Clara worked on preparing supper, a better meal than usual thanks to Wyatt's accidentally purchased supplies, and listened to the easy back and forth between the man and her children. Tom sat closest to Wyatt, soaking up every word. The twins leaned against each other on the floor, eyes wide. Ellie had climbed right into Wyatt's lap without asking permission, and he'd adjusted naturally, one arm holding her secure while he gestured with the other. It was the picture of a family, Clara realized with a jolt. Not her real family, not James and their children, but something new and different that was taking shape despite her best efforts to prevent it. The thought should have panicked her. Instead, it filled her with a longing so intense it hurt. By the time supper was ready, full dark had fallen and the storm showed no signs of abating. They ate together, crowded around Clara's small table, passing bowls and sharing the food, Wyatt fitting into the space like he'd always been there. The conversation flowed easily, comfortable silences mixed with laughter and questions. "Mr. Wyatt," Abby said suddenly, "do you got any children?" The question dropped into the warm atmosphere like a stone into still water. Wyatt's expression shifted, pain flickering across his features before he smoothed it away. Clara tensed, ready to redirect, but Wyatt spoke before she could. "I almost did once," he said quietly. "I had a wife named Sarah, and we were going to have a baby. But they both died before I got to meet my daughter. That was 5 years ago." The children absorbed this information with the strange wisdom children sometimes possessed. Tom nodded seriously. Ben looked sad. Abby reached over to pat Wyatt's hand with her small one. "That's like us with Papa," she said. "He died too. It makes you sad, doesn't it?" "Yeah, honey, it does," Wyatt agreed, his voice rough. "But Mama says people we love never really leave," Ellie piped up from her spot. "She says they stay in our hearts forever and ever." Wyatt glanced at Clara, something profound passing between them. Shared grief, shared understanding, the recognition that they were both broken in similar places, and somehow that made them fit together better. "Your mama's right," Wyatt said softly. "She's a very smart woman." After supper, the storm still showed no signs of stopping. If anything, it had intensified, wind screaming around the cabin, rain coming in horizontal sheets. Tom looked worried. "Mr. Wyatt, you really can't go home in this." "I expect you're right," Wyatt agreed. "If your mama doesn't mind, I could sleep by the fire. I've slept in worse places, believe me." Clara knew she should mind, knew that having an unmarried man sleep in her cabin overnight would set tongues wagging if anyone found out, that it risked her already precarious reputation. But the thought of sending Wyatt out into that storm was unthinkable. "You can stay," she said firmly. "I'll get you some blankets." She set him up at the hearth while she got the children ready for bed. They were excited by the adventure of it all. A storm, a guest, everything different from routine. Clara tucked them in one by one, kissing foreheads and promising that everything was fine. The storm would pass, morning would come. By the time she returned to the main room, Wyatt had banked the fire and made himself a rough bed on the floor. He'd removed his boots but was otherwise fully clothed, preserving propriety as much as possible. "Thank you for letting me stay," he said. "I know it's not conventional." "Nothing about my life is conventional anymore," Clara replied, settling into her rocking chair with some mending. She was too keyed up to sleep, too aware of Wyatt's presence in her home. "Conventional went out the window when I became a widow at 23. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the storm outside and the crackle of fire. Clara tried to focus on her mending, but her eyes kept drifting to Wyatt's profile, painted in flickering firelight. "Can I ask you something?" Wyatt said eventually. "You can ask. Whether I answer depends on the question." "Fair enough." He hesitated. "How did you do it? How did you keep going after your husband died? Because I've been trying to figure that out for 5 years, and I still don't have an answer." Clara set down her mending, considering. No one had ever asked her that before. Not directly. Not like they genuinely wanted to know, rather than just making conversation. "I didn't have a choice," she said finally. "I had 4 children depending on me. I couldn't afford to fall apart, couldn't afford to quit. So I just kept putting one foot in front of the other. Some days that's all I managed, just surviving until the next day. But you do it enough times, and eventually you realize you've survived a week, a month, a year. And somewhere in there you find reasons to keep going beyond just obligation." "What reasons?" Wyatt's voice was quiet, hungry for answers she wasn't sure she had. "Small things, mostly. The first time Ellie laughed after James died. The day Tom caught his first fish. Watching Abby and Ben play together, so lost in their own world they forgot to be sad for a while. Sunrises, the taste of coffee, the feel of clean sheets, little moments of grace that reminded me life wasn't just suffering." Clara paused. "And honestly, spite. I was so angry at the world for taking him, I was determined to survive just to prove I could." Wyatt laughed softly. "Spite, I like that. It's not very Christian of me, I know. Maybe God understands spite better than we think. Maybe he respects the stubborn ones who refuse to quit." They fell silent again, but it was a comfortable quiet now. the kind that existed between people who understood each other. Outside, the storm began to diminish slowly, the violence fading to steady rain. "Clara," Wyatt said, and there was something in his voice that made her look up sharply. "I need you to know something. I'm not here because I pity you, or because I think you need saving. I'm here because—" He struggled for words. "Because being around you and your children makes me feel alive again for the first time in 5 years. Because you're the strongest, most remarkable person I've ever met. Because when I ride away at the end of the day, I'm already looking forward to coming back the next morning." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She should deflect, should make a joke, should retreat behind the walls that had kept her safe. Instead, she found herself speaking truth. "I look forward to you coming back too," she admitted quietly. "More than I should, more than is probably wise." "Why isn't it wise?" "Because people leave, Wyatt. Because depending on someone means giving them the power to hurt you. Because I've already lost one man I loved, and I don't think I could survive losing another." The confession hung between them, raw and honest, more than she'd meant to reveal. Wyatt sat up slowly, the blanket falling away from his shoulders. "I'm not planning to leave," he said intently. "I'm not James, God rest him, and I'm not going to make promises about forever because neither of us knows what tomorrow brings. But I'm here, Clara. I want to be here, and I'm not going anywhere unless you tell me to go." Tears burned Clara's eyes. She wanted to believe him so desperately it terrified her, wanted to let herself hope that maybe she didn't have to do this alone anymore, that maybe there was room in her broken heart for something new. "I don't want you to go," she whispered. "Then I won't." The storm broke shortly before dawn, the rain fading to drizzle and then stopping entirely. Clara had dozed in her chair, waking to find weak sunlight filtering through the windows and Wyatt already up, feeding the fire quietly so as not to disturb the still sleeping children. "Morning," he said softly when he noticed her stirring. "Morning." Clara's voice was rough with sleep and emotion. Last night's conversation sat between them, acknowledged but not yet fully processed. Wyatt made coffee, had apparently figured out where she kept things through observation, and brought her a cup. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and neither pulled away immediately. The touch sent electricity up Clara's arm, made her breath catch. "Wyatt." "Clara." They spoke simultaneously, then stopped. Wyatt smiled. "You first," he said. Clara gathered her courage. "Last night, the things we said, I meant them. But I'm scared, Wyatt. Terrified, actually. And I have to think about my children, about what's best for them. I can't just—" "I know," he interrupted gently. "I know. And I'm not asking you to rush into anything. I'm just asking for a chance. Let me keep helping. Let me keep spending time with you and the children. Let whatever this is between us develop naturally, at whatever pace feels right to you. No pressure, no expectations. Just possibility." Possibility. The word hung in the air like a promise, like hope, like everything Clara had thought she'd lost. "I can do possibility," she said finally. Wyatt's smile could have lit the whole territory. "Good. That's good." The children woke shortly after, tumbling out of bed with the resilience of youth, excited about the storm's aftermath. They all went outside together to survey the damage. Branches down, the vegetable garden somewhat worse for wear, everything dripping and fresh-washed. "Look, Mama," Abby called, pointing skyward. "A rainbow!" And there it was, a perfect arc of color stretching across the clearing sky, brilliant and impossible and beautiful. Clara stood there with Wyatt beside her and her children clustered around, looking up at that rainbow, and felt something shift inside her. Maybe there could be beauty after storms. Maybe there could be color after gray. Maybe, just maybe, she could let herself believe in new beginnings. Wyatt caught her eye and smiled, and Clara smiled back, tentative but genuine, the smile of someone remembering how to hope. The days that followed felt different, charged with potential, weighted with something unspoken but acknowledged. Wyatt continued coming by daily, but now there were lingering glances, accidental touches that lasted a heartbeat too long, conversations that danced around what they were both starting to feel. He brought wildflowers one morning, nothing fancy, just prairie blooms he'd gathered on his way. "Thought they might brighten the place up," he said almost shyly, and Clara had to turn away quickly to hide how much the simple gesture affected her. She found herself taking more care with her appearance on the mornings she knew he'd come, pinning her hair more carefully, wearing her one nice dress instead of her usual work clothes. Small vanities she hadn't indulged in years, feminine awareness she'd thought died with her husband. The children noticed the change, though they didn't comment directly. But Clara caught them exchanging significant looks, caught Tom smiling when Wyatt complimented his mother's cooking, caught Abby giggling when Wyatt offered Clara his arm to help her across a muddy patch. They were hoping too, Clara realized, hoping for something she wasn't sure she could provide. A complete family, a father figure, the security of having two adults instead of one barely managing alone. The weight of their hope added to her own fears, making every decision feel monumental. But somehow, despite the fear and uncertainty, Clara found herself leaning into the possibility Wyatt had offered, found herself laughing more freely, speaking more openly, allowing herself moments of happiness without immediately waiting for disaster to strike. And when Wyatt left each evening, tipping his hat with that warm smile, promising he'd see them tomorrow, Clara discovered she believed him. Tomorrow would come, and he would be there. It was enough, for now, to hope for tomorrow. The transformation happened so gradually that Clara almost didn't notice until she caught herself humming while washing dishes one morning, realized she'd been humming for several minutes, and stopped abruptly with her hands frozen in the soapy water. She couldn't remember the last time she'd hummed, couldn't remember the last time her default state had been something other than weary determination. But lately, inexplicably, joy had been creeping back into her life in small, persistent ways. August brought heat that shimmered off the prairie in visible waves, turning the air itself into something thick and tangible. Clara's laundry business had picked up. The hotel had contracted her for all their linens, and several of the saloon girls had started bringing her their fancier dresses for careful washing. The money was desperately needed, but the workload was crushing even with Wyatt's help. On a particularly brutal Tuesday, with the sun beating down like divine punishment and sweat dripping into her eyes, Clara felt her strength finally giving out. She'd been working since before dawn, had 3 more loads to finish, and her hands were raw and bleeding from the constant immersion in lye soap. She was fighting tears of frustration and exhaustion when Wyatt appeared, took one look at her, and simply stepped in. "Go rest," he said firmly, his hands already taking over at the washboard. "I can't. There's too much—" "Clara." He turned to face her fully, his expression gentle but unyielding. "You're about to collapse. Go sit in the shade for 15 minutes. Drink some water. Let yourself breathe. The laundry will still be here, and I know how to scrub a shirt." Something in his tone, not commanding but deeply caring, broke through her resistance. Clara nodded mutely and stumbled to the porch, sinking into her rocking chair like a stone dropping into water. She meant to rest for just a moment, but exhaustion claimed her immediately, dragging her down into sleep so deep it felt like drowning. She woke to find the sun lower in the sky, shadows stretching long across the yard. Panic seized her. How long had she slept? What about the work? But when she lurched to her feet and looked around, she found all the laundry hanging clean and bright on the lines, drying in the late afternoon breeze. The washboards were scrubbed and stored. The water barrels were full. And Wyatt sat on the ground nearby, all 4 children clustered around him while he whittled something from a piece of wood. "You're awake," he said, glancing up with that warm smile. "Feel better?" Clara's throat closed up entirely. He'd done everything, finished her work, cared for her children, let her sleep for what must have been hours. And he was asking if she felt better, as though he hadn't just given her the most precious gift imaginable. "Wyatt, Her voice cracked. "You didn't have to. I know I didn't have to. I wanted to." He stood, brushing wood shavings from his pants, and walked over to her. Up close, she could see he was exhausted too. Shirt soaked with sweat, face flushed from the heat, hands red from the harsh soap. He'd worked himself nearly as hard as she always did, and he'd done it without complaint or expectation of gratitude. "Why?" Clara whispered. "Why do you keep doing this for us?" Wyatt looked at her for a long moment, something profound moving behind his blue eyes. "Because I'm falling in love with you," he said quietly, simply, like he was stating the most obvious fact in the world. "Because watching you work yourself to death kills me. Because taking care of you and your children is the only thing that's made sense to me in 5 years. Because I can't help it, Clara. I just can't help it."
The words hung in the superheated air between them, enormous and terrifying and wonderful. Clara felt her heart hammering, felt tears sliding down her cheeks, though she couldn't have said if they were from exhaustion or emotion or some complicated mixture of both. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I know. So am I." Wyatt reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "Loving someone means risking losing them. I know that better than most. But Clara, not loving you isn't an option anymore. So I'm just going to keep showing up, keep helping, keep being here until you believe I'm not going anywhere. What if I can't give you what you want? What if I'm too broken? You're not broken," Wyatt interrupted firmly. "You're surviving. There's a difference. And I'm not asking for anything except what you're willing to give. If all you can offer is friendship, I'll take it. If you need more time, I'll wait. If you never feel the same way I do, I'll accept that. But I need you to know how I feel, Clara. I need you to know that you're not alone anymore unless you choose to be." Clara couldn't speak past the lump in her throat, couldn't organize her chaotic emotions into coherent words. So instead, she did something she hadn't done in 3 years. She let herself lean on someone. Literally. She took one step forward and let her forehead rest against Wyatt's chest, let his arms come up around her, let herself be held while she cried silently against his shirt. He didn't try to quiet her tears or rush her through them. He just held her, one hand moving in slow circles on her back, his presence solid and warm and safe. And for the first time since James died, Clara let herself admit how desperately she'd needed this. Needed someone strong enough to carry some of her burden, someone kind enough to care without demanding, someone brave enough to love her despite all her sharp edges and protective walls. "Mama?" Ellie's small voice penetrated the moment. "Are you sad?" Clara pulled back quickly, wiping her eyes, trying to compose herself. But Wyatt kept one hand on her shoulder, steady and supportive. "No, baby," Clara managed. "I'm not sad. I'm just tired." "Mr. Wyatt makes you feel better, though, right?" This from Tom, who was watching the whole scene with serious, assessing eyes. "He helps you not be so tired?" Clara met her son's gaze and saw the hope there, the desperate wish for his mother to be happy again, to stop carrying everything alone. Her children had been watching her struggle for 3 years, had absorbed her stress and exhaustion and loneliness, even though she'd tried to hide it. They wanted this for her, she realized, wanted her to let Wyatt in, to let herself be cared for. "Yes," she said softly. "Mr. Wyatt helps a lot." Tom's face broke into a relieved smile, and something in Clara's chest cracked open a little wider. That evening, after Wyatt had reluctantly left for his own place and the children were in bed, Clara sat on her porch and let herself think about what Wyatt had said. He was falling in love with her. The words should have sent her running, should have triggered all her defenses, but instead they settled into her heart like they'd been waiting there all along. Was she falling in love with him? The question felt almost irrelevant because the answer was so obviously yes. She loved the way he treated her children with genuine affection rather than tolerance. Loved his quiet competence and his willingness to help without making it feel like charity. Loved how he listened when she talked, how he remembered small details, how he'd started leaving little things for her to find, wildflowers in her water bucket, a smooth stone he thought she'd like, a bird's nest he'd found that was too perfect not to share. She loved his hands, scarred and capable, gentle when they needed to be. Loved his rare full smiles that transformed his entire face. Loved the way he sang softly while he worked, off-key and unselfconscious. Loved that he'd trusted her enough to share his own grief, to show her his wounds instead of pretending he had none. But love meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant risk. What if he left? What if he died? What if she let herself depend on him and then had to learn to survive alone all over again? The thought was unbearable, which was precisely why she'd been fighting this for weeks. Except Wyatt was right about one thing. Not loving him wasn't an option anymore. The feelings were already there, had probably been growing since that first morning at the creek. The only choice she had was whether to acknowledge them or keep pretending she felt nothing. Clara made her decision sitting there in the dark, made it quietly and with full knowledge of the risks. She would let herself love Wyatt Coulter. She would let him love her back. She would give this fragile, terrifying, beautiful thing between them, a chance to grow into something real. And if it ended in heartbreak, well, at least she would have lived first. At least she would have chosen hope over fear. James would have wanted that for her, she thought, would have wanted her to find happiness again, to let someone worthy care for her and their children. The next morning dawned clear and hot, promising another scorcher. Clara dressed with unusual care, putting on her blue calico dress, the one James had always liked because it matched her eyes. She pinned her hair up carefully, even dabbed a little lavender water at her wrists from the precious small bottle she'd been hoarding for 3 years. When Wyatt arrived just after sunrise, leading his horse and carrying his usual ready smile, Clara was waiting on the porch. He stopped short when he saw her, his expression shifting to something wondering. "You look beautiful," he said, the words simple and sincere. "Thank you." Clara took a breath, gathering courage. "Wyatt, I've been thinking about what you said yesterday." His face went carefully neutral, bracing for rejection. And I think I need to be honest with you too, about how I feel." Clara twisted her hands together nervously. "I'm terrified of getting hurt, of losing someone else I love, of making a mistake that affects my children. But I'm also tired of being afraid. Tired of doing everything alone, tired of pretending I don't feel what I feel." "What do you feel?" Wyatt's voice was barely above a whisper. "I feel like you've become essential, like the day doesn't really start until you arrive. Like my children are happier and I'm happier, and everything's just better when you're here." The words tumbled out faster now, 3 years of loneliness and need finally finding voice. "I feel like maybe I'm falling in love with you too, and it scares me to death, but I don't want to fight it anymore." The smile that broke across Wyatt's face was radiant, transforming him entirely. He crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides, stopping just short of touching her, his hands hovering near her shoulders. "Can I hold you?" he asked, always asking permission, always careful of her boundaries. "Yes," Clara breathed, and then she was in his arms again, but this time it was different. This time there was no pretense of comfort or casual support. This was an embrace between 2 people who'd admitted their feelings, who were choosing each other despite the risks, who were brave enough or foolish enough to hope for more. Wyatt's hand came up to cradle the back of her head, his other arm tight around her waist, and he buried his face in her hair. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for giving me a chance. I promise I'll do everything I can to be worthy of it." "You already are," Clara said, pulling back just enough to see his face. "You've been worthy since the first day you showed up at the creek and offered to help without asking for anything in return." They stood there in the early morning light, holding each other, and Clara felt something settle deep in her chest, something that felt remarkably like peace. The moment shattered when Abby's voice called from inside. "Mama, Ben spilled the milk again." They broke apart laughing, the spell broken but the understanding remaining. Wyatt helped Clara clean up the spilled milk, joked with the children through breakfast, and settled into the day's work with his usual steady competence. But now there was an added dimension to everything, lingering glances that meant something, hands that found excuses to touch, smiles that held promises. The days took on a new quality after that morning, sweeter somehow, brighter. Wyatt still came every day, but now when he arrived, he greeted Clara with a kiss on her cheek, careful and chaste in front of the children, but unmistakably affectionate. Now when they worked side by side, they talked about things beyond just the immediate tasks, about dreams and hopes, about the future, about what they wanted from life. "I'd like to expand my herd," Wyatt said one afternoon while they hung laundry together. "Build the ranch into something substantial, maybe hire some help eventually, run cattle properly. I think this land could support it." "That's ambitious," Clara observed, but she could hear the excitement in his voice, could see him building castles in his mind. "Is it too ambitious? I don't want to sound like I'm—" "No," Clara cut him off firmly. "It's good to have plans, good to want things. I think you could do it too. You're one of the hardest workers I've ever seen." Wyatt's ears went slightly pink at the praise. "I learned from the best," he said, nodding toward her. "You work harder than anyone I've ever met, Clara." "I work hard because I have to." "Maybe, but you also take pride in it. There's a difference between surviving and living well, and you're trying to live well despite everything. That's admirable."
Clara felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. It was such a small thing, recognition that she wasn't just surviving but trying to build something good for her children, but it meant everything coming from him. They fell into comfortable silence, the kind that required no filling, just being together while the laundry dried and the children played nearby and the Montana skies stretched vast and blue overhead. But peace never lasted long in the territory. The trouble came on a Friday evening in mid-August, rolling into Dry Creek in the form of 5 rough men on rougher horses. Clara was in town collecting payment from the hotel when they arrived, loud and drunk despite the early hour, looking for entertainment and not particularly caring what form it took. She ducked into the mercantile quickly, hoping to avoid notice, but one of them, a big man with a scar running down his cheek, spotted her through the window. "Well, well," he called out, dismounting with the swagger of someone accustomed to intimidating others. "Ain't you a pretty thing? What say you come have a drink with us?" "No, thank you," Clara said stiffly, moving toward her horse. Her heart hammered against her ribs, old fears rising up. She knew this type, knew how quickly verbal harassment could turn physical, knew that being a woman alone made her vulnerable. "Wasn't really asking, sweetheart." The man stepped into her path, close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. "Don't be unfriendly now." The lady said no. The voice came from behind Clara, and she turned to find Wyatt standing there, his posture deceptively relaxed, but his eyes hard as flint. When had he arrived? She hadn't even seen him in town. The scarred man looked Wyatt up and down dismissively. "This your woman?" "I'm her friend," Wyatt said evenly, "and I'm asking you politely to step back and leave her alone." "And if I don't feel like being polite?" The man's hand drifted toward his gun belt, a threat made visible. Wyatt didn't move, but something in his stillness became dangerous. "Then I'll ask less politely." The tension stretched taut between them, and Clara's breath caught in her throat. She'd seen gunfights in Dry Creek before, had seen how fast things could turn deadly. The scarred man seemed to be weighing his options, calculating whether this quiet cowboy was worth the trouble. Finally, he spat in the dust and stepped back. "Ain't worth it. Too many witnesses anyway." He swaggered back to his companions, making crude jokes that carried clearly in the evening air. Clara's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold her horse's reins. "Are you all right?" Wyatt asked quietly, his hand light on her elbow. "I'm fine. Thank you for... If you hadn't been here, but I was here." His voice was firm. "And I always will be if I can help it. Come on, let's get you home." He rode beside her all the way back to the cabin, his presence both comforting and unsettling. Clara couldn't stop thinking about how quickly things could have gone wrong, how vulnerable she still was despite all her efforts at self-sufficiency. It was a stark reminder that her gender made her a target in ways no amount of competence could fully counter. Back at the cabin, with the children safely occupied inside, Clara found herself shaking from delayed reaction. Wyatt pulled her into his arms without a word, just held her while she trembled against him. "I hate feeling helpless," she whispered fiercely. "I hate that men like that think they can just... I know. It's not fair, and it's not right." Wyatt's arms tightened around her. "But Clara, you're not helpless. You handled that situation perfectly, stayed calm, got yourself out of immediate danger, didn't escalate. That takes strength. I only got out because you were there, this time. But you've been handling situations like that alone for 3 years. You're stronger than you think." He pulled back to look at her face. "Though I have to admit, I'm glad I was there. The thought of something happening to you..." His voice broke, and Clara saw real fear in his eyes. He loved her, she realized with sudden clarity. Really loved her. The kind of love that made you terrified of loss, that made you want to protect someone even when you knew you couldn't always be there. "I'm all right," she said softly, reaching up to touch his cheek. "I'm safe. You made sure of that." Wyatt turned his face into her palm, his eyes closing briefly. When he opened them again, they were bright with emotion. "Clara, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think about it seriously before you answer." "What is it?" "Marry me." The words hung between them, enormous and impossible and utterly sincere. Clara stared at him, her mind racing. They'd only admitted their feelings a few weeks ago. This was too fast, too soon, too... I know what you're thinking, Wyatt continued quickly. I know it's fast. But Clara, I'm 33 years old. I've been alone for 5 years. I know what I want, and I want you. I want to build a life with you and your children. I want to be able to protect you properly, to provide for you, to give those kids a father who will love them like they deserve. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want forever with you, starting as soon as you'll have me.
Wyatt, you don't have to answer right now, he said, but his eyes were pleading. Think about it. Really think about whether this could work, whether I could make you happy, whether you could trust me with your heart and your children's futures. Clara's mind spun with 1,000 thoughts at once. Marriage. To Wyatt. It would solve so many practical problems: financial security, protection, help with the children, legitimacy in a society that viewed widows with suspicion. But those were terrible reasons to marry someone, mercenary and cold. She needed to think about whether she loved him enough, whether the children would accept him as a father, whether she was ready to make that kind of commitment again. Except she already knew the answers to those questions. She did love him enough. The children already adored him, and she was tired of being alone, tired of pretending she didn't want exactly what Wyatt was offering. I have 4 children, she said quietly, testing him one last time. 4 mouths to feed, 4 futures to secure. That's a lot to take on, Wyatt. His smile was soft and sure. Then I'll make room for 5, 6, counting you, 7 if we're blessed with more children of our own someday. However many it takes, Clara. I'll make room for all of it. Something in Clara's chest broke open completely. The last wall, the final defense, the ultimate resistance. She looked at this man who'd appeared in her life like an answer to prayers she'd been too scared to voice, and she made her choice. Yes, she whispered. Yes? Wyatt looked almost afraid to believe it. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes to all of it, the life, the children, the future, everything. Yes. The sound Wyatt made was half laugh, half sob. He swept her up in his arms, spinning her around while she clung to his shoulders, both of them laughing and crying at the same time. When he set her down, he cupped her face in his hands and asked, "Can I kiss you?" Clara nodded, her heart racing, and Wyatt leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind. Their lips met softly, tentatively, a first kiss that held 3 years of loneliness and loss and the fragile hope of new beginnings. It was sweet and careful and profound, and when they broke apart, Clara felt transformed, not widow anymore, but woman, not alone, but chosen, not broken, but healing. "Mama?" Tom's voice came from the cabin door, curious. "What's happening?" Clara and Wyatt broke apart, both slightly flushed. Clara took a breath and called, "Come here, all of you. Mr. Wyatt has something to ask you." The children filed out, Tom cautious, the twins curious, Ellie rubbing sleep from her eyes. They arranged themselves on the porch, and Wyatt crouched down to be at their level, his expression serious and kind. "I've asked your mama to marry me," he said directly, "and she said yes. But I need to know if that's all right with you all. You're her children, and that makes you the most important people in her life. If you don't want me as part of this family, I'll understand." Tom studied Wyatt with those serious dark eyes, weighing and measuring. Finally, he asked, "Would you be our papa?" "If you'll have me. I'll never replace your real father. He was your papa first, and that's special. But I'd be honored to be your father too, to take care of you and your mama and sisters." "Would we have to call you papa?" This from Abby, who looked uncertain. "You can call me whatever feels right to you, Mr. Wyatt, Wyatt, Papa, Pa, anything that makes you comfortable. There's no wrong answer." Ben stepped forward, his small face earnest. "Would you teach me to ride a horse, a real horse, not just my stick?" Wyatt smiled. "I'd love to teach you to ride." "Then I think it's a good idea," Ben announced, as though that settled everything. Tom continued watching Wyatt, and Clara could see her son working through something internal. Some big decision only an 8-year-old who'd been man of the house could understand. Finally, Tom extended his hand, formal and solemn. "Welcome to the family, Pa," he said. Wyatt shook Tom's hand with equal seriousness, but Clara could see the emotion shining in his eyes at hearing that word, Pa.
for the first time. Thank you, Tom. That means everything to me. Ellie, not to be left out, toddled over and raised her arms in the universal demand to be picked up. Wyatt obliged immediately, settling her on his hip, and she patted his cheek with one small hand. You're staying forever now? She asked. Forever and ever, Wyatt confirmed, his voice thick. Good. I like you. The simplicity of it, children's acceptance, freely given, made Clara's eyes burn with tears. Her babies were choosing him too, letting him into their small circle, making space for him in their hearts. It was more than she had dared hope for. That evening, after the initial excitement had died down and the children were in bed, Clara and Wyatt sat on the porch in the cooling darkness, holding hands and making tentative plans. How soon? Wyatt asked. I don't want to rush you, but I also don't want to wait longer than necessary. 2 weeks? Clara suggested. That gives us time to post banns, make arrangements, let people know. The pastor can marry us at the church. 2 weeks, Wyatt repeated, like he was testing how it felt. I can finish getting my place habitable in 2 weeks. There's a lot to do still, but the basics will be ready. You and the children can move in right after the wedding. The thought of leaving her cabin, the place she'd shared with James, where all her children had been born, gave Clara a pang, but she pushed it aside. That was the past. Wyatt represented the future, and she'd chosen to walk toward it instead of staying trapped in memory. I'll need to talk to my customers, she said practically. Let them know I'll still be taking in washing after we're married. We'll need the income until your ranch starts producing. About that, Wyatt looked uncomfortable. Clara, I have some money saved. Not a fortune, but enough to get us through a few lean months if we're careful. You don't have to keep breaking your back over laundry if you don't want to. I like working, Clara said firmly. I like earning my own way. If that bothers you, it doesn't bother me at all. I just want you to know you have options. If you want to keep washing, I'll help you. If you want to start something different, I'll support that too. If you want to focus on the children and the house, that's fine. I'm just saying you don't have to carry everything alone anymore. The concept was so foreign, so entirely opposite from her last 3 years of experience, that Clara had trouble processing it, not having to do everything alone, having someone to share the burden with. It sounded like a dream. I think I'd like to keep taking in some washing, she said finally, but maybe less of it. Maybe just enough to contribute, but not so much I'm exhausted all the time. Whatever you want, Wyatt agreed easily. It's your choice, Clara. Always your choice. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both adjusting to this new reality they'd created. Engaged. In 2 weeks, they'd be married. In 2 weeks, Clara would be a wife again. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For being patient with me. For not pushing. For letting me come to this in my own time. Clara squeezed his hand. For loving me despite all my walls and fears and complications. Clara. Wyatt turned to face her, his expression fierce. You're not complicated. You're careful, and you have every right to be. You're protecting yourself and your children, and that's admirable. If anything, I'm grateful you trusted me enough to let me in. She leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling safe and cherished in a way she'd thought she'd never experience again. Tomorrow, there would be 1,000 details to manage, a dozen decisions to make, endless preparations for building a new life together. But tonight, she just let herself feel the simple rightness of this choice, the quiet certainty that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. 2 weeks, she whispered into the darkness. 2 weeks, Wyatt echoed and pressed a kiss to the top of her head. I can't wait. Neither could Clara, she realized with a start. For the first time in 3 years, she wasn't just surviving. She was looking forward to the future with genuine excitement, genuine hope. She was allowing herself to believe that good things could still happen, that happiness wasn't just a memory, but a possibility waiting to unfold. The stars wheeled overhead in their eternal patterns, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called out to the night. Clara closed her eyes and made a silent promise, to herself, to James's memory, to the man sitting beside her, to the future they would build together. She would be brave enough to love again. She would be strong enough to believe in second chances. She would step forward into whatever came next with her eyes open and her heart willing. The past would always be part of her, would always leave its scars. But the past didn't have to determine the future. She'd survived the worst life could throw at her, had come through the fire still standing. Now it was time to do more than just survive. It was time to live. And with Wyatt beside her and her children surrounding them both, Clara finally believed she could. The 2 weeks that followed moved with a strange duality, simultaneously crawling and racing, each day both endless and over before Clara could catch her breath. There was so much to do, so many details that seemed insignificant until they suddenly became urgent. She had to finish her outstanding laundry contracts, notify her regular customers about the change in her circumstances, mend and alter the one decent dress she owned to serve as her wedding gown. She had to help Wyatt prepare his house for a family of 6, had to figure out what to bring from her cabin and what to leave behind, had to navigate the complicated emotions of closing one chapter while opening another. The whole town knew within 2 days. Mrs. Henderson, collecting her clean linens, had been the first to hear the news and the first to spread it. By sunset the same day, Clara couldn't walk through town without receiving congratulations mixed with speculation. Some folks were genuinely happy for her. The pastor's wife clasped her hands warmly and said it was about time she had some help with those children. Others were less charitable, their smiles not quite reaching their eyes as they wondered aloud how a widow with 4 children had managed to catch herself a man so quickly. "Don't listen to them," Wyatt said firmly when Clara mentioned the gossip. "They're just bitter because their own lives aren't happy. We know the truth. And that's all that matters." But it did matter, at least a little. Clara had worked so hard to maintain her reputation these past 3 years, to be above reproach, to give no one any reason to question her character. Now there were whispers about unseemly haste, about whether perhaps something improper had been going on before the engagement. The accusations were baseless but persistent, and they stung. Tom heard some of the talk at the mercantile and came home tight-lipped and angry. "Billy Henderson said his ma said you're being too forward," he reported, his young face flushed with indignation. "He said widows are supposed to wait longer before remarrying. I told him his ma was a busybody and he should mind his own business." Clara bit back a smile at her son's fierce loyalty, even as she gently corrected him. "Tom, I appreciate you defending me, but you can't go around calling people busybodies, even when they are. People will always talk. The best thing we can do is live our lives with integrity and let our actions speak for themselves." "But it's not fair," Tom protested. "You've been alone for 3 years. You deserve to be happy. Why do people care if you're getting married now versus 6 months from now?" "Because people always have opinions about how others should live," Clara said wearily. "Especially women. We're supposed to grieve forever, apparently, or at least longer than 2 weeks after finding a good man. But Tom, honey, I don't answer to them. I answer to God and to my own conscience, and both tell me I'm doing the right thing." She believed it too, most of the time. But in the quiet moments, when doubt crept in like fog, Clara found herself questioning everything. Was she rushing into this? Was she being fair to Wyatt, bringing him 4 children and all her baggage? Was she dishonoring James's memory by moving on? The questions circled endlessly, vultures picking at her peace of mind. Wyatt seemed to sense her struggles without her having to voice them. He showed up one evening, his arms full of wildflowers, purple lupine and Indian paintbrush and delicate white columbine, and presented them to her with ceremony. "What are these for?" Clara asked, surprised and touched. "Because you looked sad this morning, and I wanted to remind you of something beautiful." Wyatt set the flowers down carefully and took her hands in his. "Clara, if you're having second thoughts, if this is too fast or too much, you can tell me. We can wait longer if you need to. I'll be disappointed, but I'll understand. The last thing I want is for you to marry me out of obligation or pressure." "It's not that." Clara struggled to articulate the tangled emotions. "I want to marry you. I do. But everyone's talking, and Tom got into a fight defending me, and I keep wondering if I'm being selfish. If I'm thinking about what I want instead of what's best for the children." "What do the children want?" Wyatt asked quietly. Clara considered. "They want you. They're excited about the wedding, about moving to your place, about having a father again. Tom's been practicing calling you Pa when he thinks no one's listening. The twins have planned out their entire bedroom already. Ellie asks every morning if it's wedding day yet. then maybe you're not being selfish. Maybe you're giving your children exactly what they need: a complete family, stability, a father who loves them. Maybe you're allowed to want happiness for yourself too. Am I, though? The question came out raw, vulnerable. Am I allowed to be happy when James is dead? When he'll never get to see his children grow up, never get another chance at life? It feels wrong somehow, like I'm betraying him by moving on. Wyatt was quiet for a long moment, his thumbs rubbing gentle circles on the backs of her hands. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. I understand that feeling more than you know. For the first 2 years after Sarah died, I felt guilty every time I smiled, every time I enjoyed a sunset or a good meal. It felt like I was forgetting her, like happiness was a betrayal. But Clara, that's not living. That's just existing in a prison of grief. How did you get past it? Honestly, time helped, and realizing that Sarah wouldn't have wanted me to stop living. She was too generous, too full of life herself to want me trapped in misery forever. I think she'd be happy I found you, happy I'm building something good again. He paused, then added carefully, "What do you think James would want for you?" Clara closed her eyes, summoning her husband's face from memory. James, who'd been kind and gentle, who'd loved his family more than anything, who'd spent his last coherent moments begging her to be strong and take care of their babies. Would he want her to spend the rest of her life alone, struggling and exhausted? Or would he want her to find help, to find love, to give their children the stable family life he'd wanted so desperately to provide? He'd want me to be happy, she admitted finally. He'd want the children to have a father. He'd probably like you, actually. You're a lot like him in some ways, steady, hardworking, kind. He'd approve. Then stop feeling guilty for being happy. Stop listening to the gossips and the busybodies. Marry me in 2 weeks like we planned, and let's build the life we both deserve. Clara opened her eyes and found Wyatt watching her with such open affection, such genuine care, that her remaining doubts dissolved like morning mist. "All right," she said, and this time she meant it completely. "No more second guessing. No more worrying about what people think. We're doing this." Wyatt's answering smile was brilliant. "We're doing this," he agreed and pulled her into a kiss that tasted like promise and new beginnings. The days took on a frantic quality as the wedding approached. Wyatt spent every available hour working on his house, transforming the dilapidated Holloway place into something resembling a home. He added a second bedroom for the children, reinforced the loft for Tom, fixed every loose board and leaky window. Clara helped when she could, bringing the children along to clean and organize, everyone working together toward the shared goal. The twins argued endlessly about bedroom arrangements. "I want the corner by the window," Abby insisted. "But I want the window," Ben countered. "You can have the corner by the door." "That's not the same thing," Tom mediated with the patience of someone well-practiced in sibling disputes. "How about you each get the window for half the year? Abby gets it spring and summer, Ben gets it fall and winter?" The twins considered this seriously, then nodded agreement. Crisis averted. Watching them, Clara felt a surge of gratitude for her oldest son's maturity. But she also worried he was growing up too fast, taking on too much responsibility. Maybe having Wyatt as a father would let Tom be more of a child again, let him relax some of the burden he'd been carrying. One afternoon, while Clara was scrubbing the floors and the children were outside with Wyatt learning to tend his small herd, she allowed herself to imagine the future. Living here, in this house that was bigger and sturdier than her cabin, waking up next to Wyatt every morning, watching him teach her children everything a father should teach. Maybe, eventually, having more children, babies that would be both hers and his, brothers and sisters for Tom and the twins and Ellie. The thought filled her with equal parts terror and longing. She was 36 years old, not exactly young for childbearing anymore. And pregnancy was always dangerous, doubly so out here where doctors were scarce and complications could turn deadly in hours. Sarah had died that way, and so had countless other women Clara had known. The risk was real and substantial. But oh, the thought of a baby with Wyatt's blue eyes and her dark hair. A child created from love rather than duty, from choice rather than expectation. A fresh start, a symbol of their new life together. "You're thinking awfully hard about something," Wyatt's voice startled her from her reverie. He stood in the doorway, dusty and tired but smiling. Just imagining the future, Clara admitted. Good things, I hope. Mostly good. Some scary. All overwhelming. Wyatt crossed to her, pulling her to her feet and into his arms, despite her protests about her wet hands and dirty dress. Overwhelming, I understand. Scary, I get too. But we're in this together, Clara. Whatever comes, we'll face it side by side. She leaned into his solid warmth, letting herself take comfort in his presence. Have I thanked you lately for being exactly what I needed? You don't have to thank me for loving you. That's not work, Clara. That's the easiest thing I've ever done. The pastor's wife helped Clara alter her wedding dress, letting out seams and adding some lace borrowed from the church's collection of donated goods. It wasn't fancy, just a simple blue cotton dress in a shade that matched Clara's eyes. But when she tried it on and saw herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked younger somehow, the permanent lines of stress around her mouth softening, hope replacing the perpetual worry in her expression. You're glowing, the pastor's wife said warmly. That's what love does, I suppose. Makes us all beautiful. Clara touched her reflection wonderingly. Was she beautiful? She'd never thought of herself that way. Too thin, too worn, too marked by hardship. But maybe Wyatt saw something different. Maybe through his eyes, she was something worth treasuring. The night before the wedding, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in her cabin one last time, listening to her children's breathing, cataloging every familiar sound and smell. This place had been her whole world for years. These four walls had witnessed her highest joys and deepest sorrows. James had died in this room. Her babies had been born here. Every memory she had of her marriage was soaked into these rough-hewn boards. Leaving felt like abandonment, like betrayal. But staying would be worse, would mean clinging to the past instead of embracing the future. James was gone, and no amount of living in their old home would bring him back. The best way to honor his memory was to do what he'd always wanted, give their children a good life, find happiness where she could, keep moving forward. Goodbye, Clara whispered into the darkness, saying it to the cabin, and to James, and to the woman she'd been for 3 hard years. Thank you for everything. I'll never forget you. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, the October sky that particular shade of crystalline blue that only happened in Montana. Clara woke before sunrise, her stomach a tangle of nerves and excitement. The pastor's wife arrived early to help her dress and arrange her hair, chattering cheerfully about the weather and the growing number of people planning to attend. Half the town's coming, she reported. Everyone loves a wedding, and you two have become quite the romantic story. The lonely widow and the kind cowboy who won her heart. Clara made a face. I'm not sure I like being reduced to a story. Well, you'd better get used to it. People need something to talk about, and at least this is a happy tale instead of tragedy or scandal. The children were beside themselves with excitement, the twins arguing over who got to carry the wildflower bouquet down the aisle, Tom trying to slick his hair down with water and failing, Ellie spinning in circles in the new dress the pastor's wife had sewn for her. They were beautiful, all of them, and Clara felt her throat close up with emotion watching them. You all look so grown up, she managed. Do you think Pa will like our fancy clothes? Abby asked anxiously. Pa. They'd started calling him that consistently now, trying it out, making it fit, and Wyatt never corrected them, never suggested anything else. He just accepted the title with quiet grace, as though he'd been their father all along. He'll love them, Clara assured her daughter. He'll love all of you, just like always. The church was packed when they arrived, every pew filled with townspeople who'd come to witness the union. Clara saw familiar faces, her laundry customers, shopkeepers she'd traded with, neighbors from her scattered corner of the territory. Some looked genuinely happy for her. Others wore expressions of poorly concealed judgment. Clara lifted her chin and ignored them all, focusing instead on the man waiting for her at the altar. Wyatt stood straight and proud in his Sunday best, a suit she'd never seen him wear, his hair neatly trimmed, his face clean-shaven. But his eyes were the same, warm and blue and full of love as he watched her walk down the aisle with Tom on one side and the twins on the other, Ellie toddling ahead dropping flowers with more enthusiasm than accuracy. When Clara reached the front of the church and Tom solemnly placed her hand in Wyatt's, she felt a shift happen, some fundamental change in the universe's alignment, some sense of rightness clicking into place. This was exactly where she was supposed to be, exactly what she was supposed to be doing. The pastor began speaking, his words the familiar liturgy of marriage. Clara barely heard them, too focused on Wyatt's face, on the way his hand trembled slightly holding hers, on the absolute certainty she saw in his expression. He wasn't afraid, wasn't second-guessing. He wanted this, wanted her and her chaos and her complicated life, with no reservations, no doubts, no conditions. Do you, Wyatt James Coulter, take Clara Marie Boone to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? I do, Wyatt said firmly, his voice carrying through the church. I absolutely do. And do you, Clara Marie Boone, take Wyatt James Coulter to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? Clara took a breath, thought of James watching from wherever souls went after death, silently asked his permission and blessing one final time. Then she looked into Wyatt's eyes and spoke her truth. I do. With all my heart, I do. The pastor smiled. Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Montana and Almighty God, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Wyatt, you may kiss your bride. Wyatt stepped forward, cupped Clara's face in his work-roughened hands, and kissed her with a tenderness that made her knees weak. It wasn't a brief ceremonial kiss, but something deeper, more meaningful, a promise made physical, a commitment sealed with affection. When they broke apart, Clara was breathless and blushing, and the church erupted in applause. Ladies and gentlemen, the pastor announced, I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Wyatt Coulter, and their children Tom, Abigail, Benjamin, and Eleanor. The children clustered around them immediately, and Wyatt pulled them all into a group embrace, this instant family, bound together by choice and love and hope. Clara felt tears streaming down her face, but they were good tears, happy tears, the kind that came from overwhelming emotion rather than grief. Are you happy, Mama? Ellie asked, patting Clara's wet cheeks with concern. I'm very happy, baby. Happier than I've been in a long time. Good, Ellie announced. Now we have a papa again, a real one who doesn't go away. Wyatt's eyes met Clara's over the children's heads, and she saw her own emotion reflected back, gratitude and wonder and the particular joy that came from unexpected second chances. The reception was held in the church hall, a simple affair with donated food and homemade decorations, but it felt grand to Clara. People she barely knew came up to offer congratulations, to admire the children, to tell Wyatt he was a lucky man. For once, Clara didn't bristle at the phrasing. He was lucky, but so was she. They were both lucky to have found each other, to have been brave enough to risk love again. Tom stayed close to Wyatt all afternoon, proudly introducing him to anyone who'd listen as my pa. The twins stuffed themselves on cake until they were nearly sick, spinning dizzy circles with the other children. Ellie fell asleep in Wyatt's arms, worn out from excitement, her small face peaceful and content. As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Wyatt pulled Clara aside. Ready to go home? He asked quietly. Home. Not her cabin, not his place, but their home. Their shared space, their new beginning. Clara looked around at the gathering, at the children playing, at the neighbors gossiping, at the remnants of celebration scattered across tables. This was her community, for better or worse. These people had watched her struggle, had helped when they could and judged when they couldn't, had witnessed her lowest moments and now her highest. They were part of her story, but they weren't the whole story. Yes, she said. Let's go home. They loaded the children into the wagon Wyatt had borrowed for the occasion, along with the few possessions Clara was bringing from her old life. She'd sold or given away most of it, the furniture too worn to keep, the dishes too chipped to matter. She'd kept only the things that had sentimental value. James's pocket watch for Tom, her mother's quilt, the wooden bird James had carved for their first anniversary. Everything else was being left behind with the cabin and the past it represented. The ride to the Coulter ranch, she still wasn't used to thinking of herself as a Coulter, Took 20 minutes, the children chattering excitedly the whole way. When they crested the rise and saw the house waiting below, lights glowing warm in the windows, Clara felt something settle in her chest. This was it. This was her new life, starting right now. Wyatt carried Ellie inside while the other children tumbled out of the wagon, racing each other to the door. Clara followed more slowly, taking in every detail. The house looked different than the last time she'd seen it, lived in now, welcoming. Wyatt had hung curtains in the windows, placed rugs on the floors, filled the kitchen with dishes and supplies. He'd prepared for them, had made space for his instant family with care and intention. "What do you think?" Wyatt asked nervously, setting Ellie down gently on the sofa. Clara turned in a slow circle, seeing the home he'd built for them, for her and her children, and the life they'd share. Seeing the effort and love poured into every detail, every preparation. Seeing hope made manifest in wood and cloth and careful arrangement. "It's perfect," she said, and meant it absolutely. "It's the most perfect thing I've ever seen." The children claimed their rooms with loud enthusiasm, the twins already arguing about bed placement despite having agreed on it weeks ago. Tom disappeared into the loft, his private space where he could be 8 years old and 14 and everywhere in between. Ellie curled up in the rocking chair by the fireplace, thumb in her mouth, watching everything with wide, sleepy eyes. "I should get her to bed," Clara said, but Wyatt caught her hand. "In a minute. First, I have something for you." He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small wooden box, worn smooth with age. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, was a ring, simple gold with a small turquoise stone set in the center. "It was my grandmother's," Wyatt said quietly. "The only thing of value I own, really. Sarah wore it for the 5 years we were married, and when she died, I put it away. Thought I'd never have reason to take it out again. But I want you to have it now, Clara. Want you to wear it as a symbol of everything we're building together." Clara's hand shook as she took the ring, feeling the weight of history in it. Wyatt's grandmother wearing it in love, Sarah wearing it in love, now being offered to her in love. 3 women, 3 marriages, 3 chances at happiness spanning generations. "Are you sure?" she asked. "This has so much history, so much meaning, which is exactly why I want you to have it. Sarah would approve. She was generous like that. And my grandmother would have loved that her ring keeps being part of love stories. Please, Clara, wear it and know that you're part of something bigger than just us. You're part of a legacy of people who chose love despite the risks." Clara slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for her all along. The turquoise caught the lamplight, glowing warm and blue. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll treasure it always." Wyatt pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "We did it," he said softly. "We're actually married. You're actually my wife." "You're actually my husband," Claire replied, testing out the word. Husband. It felt strange and familiar at once, like wearing shoes that had been broken in by someone else but were starting to fit her feet. They stood there holding each other while chaos erupted around them, children calling questions, unpacking, making noise, the normal disorder of 5 people settling into shared space. Eventually, they'd have to address all of it, organize and mediate and establish routines. But for this moment, they just held each other and marveled at the improbable miracle of their union. Later that night, after the children were finally asleep and the house had quieted, Clara and Wyatt sat on their front porch watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. She was wearing a borrowed nightgown from the pastor's wife. He was in his undershirt and trousers, and they looked like any married couple settling in for the evening. Except they weren't any married couple. They were Clara and Wyatt, 2 broken people who'd found each other and decided to build something whole from their combined fragments. "Are you nervous?" Wyatt asked quietly. Clara considered the question honestly. She should be nervous. First night as a married woman, sharing a bed with a man who wasn't James, navigating the intimate aspects of marriage she hadn't experienced in 3 years. But instead she just felt peaceful, certain, ready. "No," she said. "Should I be? I don't know. I'm a little nervous." Wyatt smiled ruefully. "I want to do everything right. Want to make you happy. Want to be worthy of the trust you're giving me." "You're already worthy, Wyatt. You've been proving it since the first day we met." Clara took his hand, threading their fingers together. We'll figure it out as we go, just like everything else. Together. Together, Wyatt echoed and kissed her softly. They stayed on the porch a while longer, reluctant to end the day, wanting to hold on to this perfect moment before life's complications inevitably intruded. Tomorrow, there would be work to do, children to raise, a ranch to run, a life to build from scratch. There would be hard days and disagreements and moments of doubt. There would be all the challenges that came with blending a family, with learning to be partners, with choosing each other every day instead of just once. But tonight, under the vast Montana sky, with stars burning overhead like promises, Clara let herself simply be happy. She'd survived the worst. She'd endured loss and loneliness and despair. She'd kept going when quitting would have been easier. And now, finally, she was receiving her reward. Not just survival, but life. Not just existence, but joy. Not just making do, but thriving. "I love you," she said to Wyatt, the words coming easier now, less frightening. "I love you too," he replied. "I'll love you tomorrow, and the next day, and all the days after that. I promise." It was a promise Clara believed absolutely, and as they finally went inside, hand in hand, to begin their first night as husband and wife, she carried that certainty with her like a light against the darkness. The house welcomed them with warm lamplight and the quiet breathing of sleeping children. Their children now, all 5 of them, bound together by choice and love and the particular grace that came from second chances. Clara closed the door behind them, and in that simple action, she closed the door on her old life too. The widow Clara Boone was gone, transformed into Clara Coulter, wife, mother, partner, woman who dared to hope. And in the bedroom that Wyatt had prepared with such care, as he held her with tenderness and kissed her with reverence, Clara finally understood what she'd been too afraid to believe before. Love wasn't a finite resource that got used up when someone died. It was infinite, renewable, capable of growing back even stronger after being cut down. She'd loved James with all her heart, and that love would always be part of her. But there was room in that same heart for Wyatt too. Room for this different but equally profound connection. Room for all the love still waiting to be discovered. "Thank you for making room for us," she whispered against his shoulder as they lay together afterward, tangled and content. "For making room for all 5 of us." 6, Wyatt corrected sleepily, pulling her closer. "You keep forgetting to count yourself. But you're the most important one, Clara. You're the center that holds everything together. I didn't just make room for 5. I made room for 6. For all of us. For our family. Our family." The words settled into Clara's heart like a benediction, like the answer to prayers she'd stopped praying, like grace she hadn't known she still deserved. She fell asleep in her husband's arms, in her new home, with her children safe under the same roof, and for the first time in 3 long years, Clara Boone, now Clara Coulter, slept deeply and dreamlessly, untroubled by fear or worry or the weight of carrying everything alone. She'd made it through the storm, and on the other side, waiting with patient kindness, had been exactly what she needed most. Not rescue, not charity, not pity, just love. Simple, steadfast, transformative love. And really, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Morning came soft and golden, sunlight filtering through the curtains Wyatt had hung with such care. Clara woke slowly, disoriented for a moment by the unfamiliar room, the different quality of light, the warm presence beside her. Then memory returned. She was married. This was her home now. The man sleeping peacefully next to her was her husband, and she felt a smile spread across her face so wide it almost hurt. She studied Wyatt in the early light, his face relaxed in sleep, younger somehow without the weight of waking worries. There were lines around his eyes from squinting into sun and wind, a small scar on his chin she'd never noticed before, and his hair stuck up at odd angles that made him look almost boyish. He was handsome, she decided, though not in any conventional way. His appeal was quieter, steadier, the kind of attractiveness that grew the more you knew someone, that came from character rather than mere features. As though sensing her scrutiny, Wyatt's eyes opened, and the smile that crossed his face when he saw her watching was luminous. "Morning, wife," he said, his voice rough with sleep but warm with affection. "Morning, husband," Clara replied, testing out the word again. It still felt new, like clothes that hadn't quite been broken in yet, but not uncomfortable, just different. They lay there for a few precious minutes, neither wanting to break the spell, both knowing the demands of the day would descend soon enough. Sure enough, footsteps thundered overhead as Tom woke in the loft, followed shortly by the twins' voices raised in some argument already in progress. Ellie's high-pitched call of "Mama" sealed the end of their peaceful morning. "Reality intrudes," Wyatt said with wry amusement, sitting up and stretching. "Welcome to married life with 4 children." 5, Clara corrected automatically, then caught herself. "Wait, no, 4. I keep doing that." Wyatt looked at her curiously. "Doing what?" "You said 4 children, and I automatically started to correct you to 5 before I remembered Ellie's the 4th. I don't know why I keep thinking there's 5. Clara shook her head at her own confusion, but Wyatt had gone very still, his expression shifting to something wondering and almost reverent. "Clara," he said carefully, "is there any chance you could be pregnant?" The question hung in the air between them, enormous and impossible, and suddenly not impossible at all. Clara's mind raced, counting back, doing the mathematics that women did without thinking. Her monthly courses had always been irregular, especially under stress, so she hadn't thought much of missing them. But it had been, 6 weeks? 7? And there'd been that persistent nausea she'd attributed to nerves about the wedding, and the exhaustion that seemed deeper than usual, and, "Oh," she said faintly, "oh, I think I might be." Wyatt's face transformed, joy breaking across it like sunrise. "Really? Are you sure?" "No, I'm not sure. I'd need more time to be certain. But the signs are there, now that I think about it." Clara pressed a hand to her still flat stomach, wonder and terror warring inside her. "Wyatt, I'm 36 years old. Having a baby at my age is dangerous. And after Ellie's birth, the doctor said—" "What did the doctor say?" Wyatt's voice had gone sharp with concern. Clara hadn't thought about this in years, had pushed the memory away because it hadn't mattered when she'd been alone and unlikely to remarry. "He said I'd nearly bled out, that my body had taken the maximum it could handle, that having another baby might—" She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the word that hovered between them like a curse. "Might kill you," Wyatt finished flatly. His hand found hers, gripping tight. "We'll go see a doctor. A real one, not some frontier physician who doesn't know what he's talking about. We'll find out what's true and what the risks really are, and then we'll decide together what to do." "There's not much deciding to be done if I'm already pregnant," Clara pointed out. "It's not like I can change it." "No, but we can make sure you have the best care possible. We can bring in help so you're not overworking. We can do everything in our power to keep you safe." Wyatt's voice was fierce, protective. "I just got you, Clara. I'm not losing you. Whatever it takes, whatever it costs, you're going to be fine. We both are." Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that love and determination could overcome biology and chance. But she'd seen too many women die in childbirth, had held James's hand while he weakened and faded despite all her efforts. She knew firsthand that wanting someone to survive wasn't always enough. "Mama!" Ellie's voice came louder now, punctuated by small fists pounding on the bedroom door. "Mama, I'm hungry!" "We should get up," Clara said, grateful for the interruption, for the excuse to table this enormous, terrifying conversation. "The children need breakfast." But Wyatt didn't release her hand. "We're going to talk about this more. Today. Promise me you won't just push it aside and pretend everything's fine." "I promise," Clara agreed, because there was no point pretending this wasn't happening, wasn't real, wasn't potentially life-changing in the best and worst ways possible. They dressed quickly and emerged to organized chaos. Tom was attempting to make breakfast and failing spectacularly, having used salt instead of sugar in what was supposed to be porridge. The twins were arguing about whose turn it was to feed the chickens. Ellie had somehow gotten into the flour and was covered head to toe in white dust, looking like a small ghost. Clara and Wyatt exchanged glances, then burst out laughing simultaneously. This was their life now, constant motion, endless small crises, the particular mayhem that came with 4 children under one roof. It was overwhelming and exhausting and absolutely perfect. "All right, everyone stop what you're doing," Clara called out with the authority of a woman who'd been managing chaos for years. Tom, thank you for trying to help, but that porridge is beyond saving. Abby, Ben, it's Ben's turn for chickens. I remember because Abby did it yesterday. Ellie, sweetheart, how did you even reach the flour? I climbed, Ellie said proudly, pointing at a chair she'd apparently dragged across the kitchen. Of course you did. All right, bath time for you, and everyone else can help Pop. She caught herself, glancing at Wyatt. Help your father make a proper breakfast. Wyatt's expression at hearing her call him father, at the casual way she'd integrated him into the family structure, was worth every moment of uncertainty and fear. He stepped into the role naturally, directing the children with gentle authority, turning breakfast preparation into a lesson about cooking and measurements and working together. Clara carried Ellie off to wash the flour away, and while she scrubbed her youngest daughter clean, her mind kept returning to the possibility growing inside her. A baby. Wyatt's baby. A symbol of their new life together, a fresh start. Mama, you're squeezing too hard, Ellie protested, and Clara realized she'd been gripping her daughter's arm without noticing. Sorry, baby. Mama was thinking about something else. What were you thinking about? Just grown-up things. Nothing for you to worry about. Ellie studied her with those solemn green eyes that saw too much. Are you happy, Mama? You look worried. Out of the mouths of babes, Clara thought. I'm very happy, Ellie, and a little worried too, but that's just what mamas do. We worry because we love you all so much. But you don't have to worry all alone anymore, Ellie said with the simple wisdom of 4-year-olds. You have Pa now. He can help with the worrying. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Her daughter was right. She didn't have to carry everything alone anymore. Whatever happened with this pregnancy, if she even was pregnant, she had Wyatt to face it with her. The thought was both comforting and terrifying because letting someone help meant letting them close enough to be hurt by loss. Breakfast was a cheerful affair, everyone talking over each other, making plans for the day. Wyatt needed to check the cattle, and Tom immediately volunteered to help, his face eager with the prospect of real ranch work. The twins wanted to explore their new surroundings, and Ellie just wanted to be wherever Clara was. It was the normal rhythm of family life, and Clara felt herself relaxing into it despite her underlying anxiety. After breakfast, while Wyatt was outside with Tom and the children were occupied, Clara slipped away to the small root cellar where she'd stored her medicinal herbs. She found the pennyroyal and rue, the herbs women used when they suspected pregnancy and needed to know for certain. Mixed properly, brewed into tea, they would bring on bleeding if a woman was pregnant, effectively ending it in the very early stages. Clara stood there holding the dried plants, weighing them in her hands like she was weighing her life. She could drink this tea and know for certain within a day or two. If she wasn't pregnant, nothing would happen. If she was, the pregnancy would end, and with it the danger of childbirth at her age, the risk of leaving her children motherless, the possibility of dying like Sarah had died. It would be the practical choice, the safe choice, the choice that prioritized the 4 children she already had over the potential ones she might be carrying. But Clara found herself remembering Wyatt's face that morning, the joy that had transformed him when he'd realized she might be pregnant. Found herself imagining a baby with his blue eyes and quiet smile. Found herself wanting, desperately and against all logic, to give him this gift, a child of his own, a fresh start after years of grief, living proof that love could triumph over loss. She was still standing there, paralyzed by indecision, when Wyatt found her. Clara? His voice was gentle, concerned. What are you doing down here? She couldn't lie to him, didn't want to start their marriage with deception. So she held up the herbs, let him see what she'd been considering. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by something that looked like pain. You were thinking about ending it, he said quietly. Not an accusation, just a statement of fact. I was thinking about being practical, Clara corrected. About staying alive for the 4 children I already have. About not taking unnecessary risks. And what did you decide? I don't know yet. That's the problem. I don't know what the right choice is. Wyatt crossed to her, took the herbs gently from her hands and set them aside. Then he cupped her face in his palms, forcing her to meet his eyes. Clara, I want you to listen to me very carefully. I love you more than I can say. And if we're blessed with a baby, I'll be the happiest man in the territory. But not at the cost of your life. Never at that cost. If continuing this pregnancy puts you in real danger, if the doctor confirms what that frontier physician said years ago, then we won't continue it. We'll use those herbs or find another way, and I'll be sad, but I'll understand. Because you're the most important person in my life. You're irreplaceable. And I need you to live, Clara. Your children need you to live.
We all need you. Tears streamed down Clara's face. But you want this baby. I can see how much you want it. I want you more. 1,000 times more. Yes, a baby would be wonderful, but only if it doesn't cost me my wife. That's not a trade I'm willing to make. What if I want to try? The words came out in a whisper, barely audible. What if I want to give you this gift? Want to prove that good things can still happen? Want to believe that maybe this time it will be different? Wyatt was quiet for a long moment, and she could see him wrestling with his own desires and fears. Finally, he spoke carefully. If you want to try, then we try. But only after we talk to a real doctor. Only after we understand the actual risks instead of 3-year-old warnings from a man who might not have known what he was talking about. And if the risk is too high, we don't do it. We find another way to build our family. Or we accept that 4 children is already more blessing than most people ever get. What other way? Clara asked, genuinely curious. Adoption, maybe. There are always children who need homes, orphans from wagon trains, or women who died in childbirth. We could give one of them a family instead of risking you to create a new life. The end result is the same. Another child to love, another soul to raise. Does it matter if they're blood or not? Clara thought of Tom and the twins and Ellie, thought of how completely Wyatt had accepted them as his own despite no biological connection, thought of how family was made through love and choice as much as through blood and birth. Maybe he was right. Maybe there were other paths to growing their family that didn't require her to risk everything. All right, she said finally. We'll wait. We'll find a real doctor and get real information. Then we'll decide together what to do. Wyatt pulled her into his arms, holding her tight enough that she could feel his heart beating against her chest. Thank you, he whispered into her hair. Thank you for being willing to wait, for not making this decision alone. They stood there in the cool darkness of the root cellar, holding each other while life continued overhead, children playing, chickens clucking, wind moving through the prairie grass. It was a moment suspended outside time, a breath held before plunging forward, and Clara memorized every detail of it. The smell of dried herbs and earth, the solid warmth of Wyatt's body, the sound of her children's laughter filtering down from above. The feeling of being held, being cherished, being loved enough that someone would put her life above their own desires. The next few weeks passed in a blur of adjustment and discovery. Clara settled into her role as Wyatt's wife, learning his rhythms and preferences, figuring out how to manage a larger household with more resources than she'd ever had before. The children adapted with the resilience of youth, squabbling and playing and slowly accepting that this new arrangement was permanent, that Wyatt wasn't going to disappear like their birth father had. Tom, especially, bloomed under Wyatt's attention. He followed his new father everywhere, soaking up lessons about ranching and livestock, asking endless questions that Wyatt answered with patient thoroughness. Clara watched her son transform from a boy forced to be too old too soon into someone who could actually be 8 years old, who could make mistakes without the weight of responsibility crushing him, who could laugh freely because someone else was there to catch what he dropped. The twins settled their bedroom dispute with surprising maturity, deciding to rotate positions every month so both got equal time by the window. They spent their days exploring the property, coming back muddy and happy with treasures they'd found. Interesting rocks, bird feathers, a shed snakeskin that made Clara shudder but which Wyatt examined with appropriate scientific interest. They were healing, she realized, from the trauma of losing their father so young, from years of watching their mother struggle. Security did that for children, gave them space to be young again. Ellie attached herself to Wyatt with single-minded devotion, following him around calling Pa, 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 until he picked her up and carried her while he worked. He indulged her shamelessly, carving her toys, telling her stories, letting her help with tasks that would have been finished faster without her assistance. Clara watched them together and felt her heart expand with a love so fierce it bordered on painful. She still hadn't been to see a doctor about the pregnancy.
Part of her was afraid of confirmation, afraid that making it real would somehow make it more dangerous. But she couldn't ignore the signs forever, the persistent nausea that struck mostly in the mornings, the exhaustion that went bone deep, the way her breasts were tender and her emotions unpredictable. She was pregnant, almost certainly, and eventually she'd have to face that reality. The decision was taken out of her hands one morning in late October when she woke up feeling particularly ill, barely made it outside before being violently sick. Wyatt found her there, pale and shaking, and his face went grim. "That's it," he said firmly. "We're going to see Dr. Morrison in Helena, today. I don't care if it's a 3-day ride. You need proper medical care and you need it now." "Wyatt, I can't just leave the children." The pastor's wife already said she'd watch them if we needed to travel. "I asked her last week, just in case." "We're going, Clara. No more delays, no more excuses." Part of Clara wanted to argue, to assert her independence, to insist she could manage this alone, like she'd managed everything else. But a larger part was secretly relieved to have the decision made for her, to have someone else taking charge, to have a partner who cared enough to insist on her well-being, even when she was prepared to neglect it. They left the next morning after tearful goodbyes from the children, who'd never been separated from Clara for more than a few hours. The ride to Helena was long and uncomfortable, especially for Clara, who felt increasingly unwell as they traveled. But Wyatt was patient and solicitous, stopping frequently to let her rest, finding the smoothest paths, doing everything possible to ease her discomfort. Dr. Morrison's office was in a proper building on Helena's main street, and the doctor himself was a distinguished-looking man in his 50s with kind eyes and an air of professional competence. He examined Clara thoroughly while Wyatt waited outside, asked detailed questions about her medical history, and finally delivered his verdict with careful precision. "You are indeed pregnant, Mrs. Coulter. I'd estimate about 8 weeks along, give or take. And regarding the concerns you mentioned about your previous physician's warnings," he paused, consulting his notes, "I won't say the risks aren't real. You're 36, which is considered advanced maternal age. Your last birth was difficult, and there was significant hemorrhaging. But medical science has advanced considerably even in the past 4 years. We have better techniques now for managing bleeding, better understanding of what causes complications. I wouldn't call this pregnancy impossible or even inadvisable, but it will require careful monitoring and perhaps some restrictions on your activities as you progress." Clara felt tears of relief streaming down her face. Not impossible, not a death sentence, just difficult, requiring care and caution, but possible. "What kind of restrictions?" she asked. "No heavy lifting after the 5th month. Plenty of rest, particularly in the final trimester. Someone should be with you when you deliver, preferably someone with medical training or at least experience with difficult births. And at the first sign of unusual bleeding or severe pain, you need to get to a doctor immediately, even if it means traveling." "I can do all that," Clara said eagerly. "We have help now, and my husband is very careful about my health." Dr. Morrison smiled. I could tell from the way he was pacing outside like a caged animal. He clearly cares deeply for you. "That's good. You'll need that support over the coming months. But Mrs. Coulter, I need you to understand something. Even with all precautions, childbirth is dangerous. At your age, with your history, the risks are elevated. There's a real possibility of complications that could be serious or even fatal. I don't say this to frighten you, but you need to make this decision with full knowledge of what you're facing." Clara thought of the herbs in her root cellar, of the choice she'd been too afraid to make, of Wyatt's declaration that he wanted her more than any baby. She thought of her 4 children who needed their mother, of the life she'd finally started building after years in the wilderness. She thought of all the reasons to end this pregnancy, to choose safety over risk. And then she thought of the tiny life growing inside her, of Wyatt's joy when he'd realized she was pregnant, of giving her children a sibling who would be born into love and security. She thought of defying death one more time, of proving that hope could triumph over fear, of choosing life even when life was dangerous. "I want to try," she said firmly. "I want to have this baby. And I'm going to do everything right, follow every instruction, be as careful as humanly possible. But I want to try." Dr. Morrison nodded slowly. "Then I'll do everything in my power to help you succeed. I want to see you again in a month, and monthly after that until we're closer to your time.
If you start having any problems before then, send word immediately and I'll come to you. Do you have a midwife in your area? There's Mrs. Patterson. She's delivered most of the babies in Dry Creek. Good. Coordinate with her, but make sure she knows to send for me if anything seems wrong. And Mrs. Coulter, try not to worry too much. Stress isn't good for you or the baby. Focus on staying healthy and let that husband of yours do the heavy worrying.
When Clara emerged from the examination room, she found Wyatt wearing a groove in the waiting room floor with his pacing. He looked up sharply when she appeared, and she could see the fear naked on his face. Well? He asked, his voice rough. I'm pregnant. About 8 weeks. And Dr. Morrison says it's dangerous but not impossible. He gave me restrictions and instructions, and I have to see him monthly, but he thinks if I'm careful, I can do this. Wyatt pulled her into his arms right there in the doctor's office, not caring who saw. Are you sure? He asked into her hair. Are you absolutely certain you want to take this risk? I'm sure, Clara said, and realized she meant it completely. I'm terrified, but I'm sure. We're going to have a baby, Wyatt, a fresh start, a symbol of everything we've built together. It's going to be all right. I have to believe it's going to be all right. The ride home felt different, lighter somehow, despite the weight of knowledge they now carried. They stopped at a hotel for the night rather than camping, Wyatt insisting Clara needed a proper bed and rest. And lying there in the dark, his hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach, Clara allowed herself to feel hopeful. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe medicine had advanced enough. Maybe she was strong enough. Maybe love was powerful enough to overcome biology and chance. Maybe, just maybe, she'd get to have it all. Her life, her children, her husband, and this new baby that represented everything good their union could create. The children greeted them with explosive enthusiasm when they returned, the twins practically tackling Clara in their eagerness to hug her. Even Tom, usually more reserved, clung to her for a long moment. Did you miss us? Clara asked, smoothing his hair. So much, Tom admitted. It was weird without you here. The house felt empty. Well, we're back now, and we have some news to share with all of you. They gathered in the living room, 4 expectant faces turned toward their parents. Clara glanced at Wyatt, who nodded encouragement. How would you all feel about having a baby brother or sister? Clara asked. The room erupted. Abby shrieked with excitement. Ben started jumping up and down. Tom's face split into a grin. Only Ellie looked confused. A baby? Where's the baby? She asked, looking around as though expecting one to materialize. The baby is growing in Mama's belly, Wyatt explained gently. It will take a long time, many months, before the baby is ready to be born. But sometime next spring you'll have a new brother or sister. Will you still love us? Ben asked suddenly, his expression anxious. When the new baby comes, will you forget about us? Clara's heart broke a little at the question, at the insecurity that still lingered despite months of stability. She knelt down to Ben's level, gathering him close. Never, she said fiercely. We will never forget about you or love you less. Having a new baby doesn't take away love from the rest of you. It just makes more love. There's always enough love, Ben. Always. Your mama's right, Wyatt added, pulling the other children close. You 4 were here first, and you'll always be special. The baby will be lucky to have such wonderful big brothers and sisters to look up to and learn from. The reassurance seemed to satisfy them, and soon the children were excitedly making plans for the baby, arguing about names and whether it would be a boy or girl and where the baby would sleep. Their enthusiasm was infectious, and Clara found herself laughing at their earnest debates about whether the baby should be named Thunder or Flower or some combination thereof. That night, after the children were finally settled and the house was quiet, Clara and Wyatt sat by the fire making their own plans. They discussed converting the small storage room into a nursery, about asking Mrs. Patterson to be present for the birth along with Dr. Morrison if possible, about gradually shifting Clara's workload to prepare for when she'd be restricted from heavy labor. I've been thinking, Wyatt said carefully, about hiring some help. A woman from town who could come a few times a week to assist with cleaning and cooking. We can afford it with the cattle sales, and it would take pressure off you. Clara's first instinct was to refuse, to insist she could manage everything herself like she always had. But she caught herself, recognized the old patterns of thinking that no longer served her. She didn't have to do everything alone anymore. Accepting help wasn't weakness. It was wisdom. "That's a good idea," she said instead. "Maybe we could ask if Mrs. Henderson's daughter would be interested. She's been looking for work, and I know she's trustworthy." Wyatt's smile was warm with approval and relief. "That's my practical wife. I was worried you'd fight me on this."
The old Clara would have, Claire admitted. But I'm learning, slowly, that it's okay to need help, okay to accept it when it's offered. You've taught me that.
"We teach each other," Wyatt corrected gently.
You've taught me that it's possible to love again after loss, that hope isn't foolish, that good things can still happen even after the worst has already happened. We're learning together, Clara, building this life one day at a time. The months that followed were a strange mixture of ordinary and extraordinary. Life continued with its normal rhythms, children to raise, a ranch to run, a household to maintain, but underneath it all was the constant awareness of the life growing inside Clara, of the approaching deadline when everything would change again. Clara's pregnancy progressed well at first. The morning sickness eased after the first trimester, and she felt almost normal through the winter months. She followed Dr. Morrison's instructions religiously, giving up heavy lifting, resting when she needed to, letting Mrs. Henderson's daughter, Mary, help with the harder housework. Wyatt was attentive to the point of being overprotective, rushing to help her anytime she so much as stood up too quickly, worrying constantly about every small twinge or pain. "I'm pregnant, not dying," Clara said one afternoon when he'd practically carried her to a chair after she'd been on her feet for 20 minutes. "Women have babies all the time, Wyatt. It's natural." "Natural doesn't mean safe," he countered, "and I'm not taking any chances with you." His concern was touching even when it was frustrating. Clara recognized it for what it was: fear born of having lost someone before, of knowing exactly how quickly things could go wrong. So she indulged his protectiveness even when it chafed, understanding that it came from love rather than any doubt about her capability. The children adapted to the upcoming change with varying degrees of enthusiasm. The twins treated Clara's growing belly like a fascinating science experiment, arguing about whether the baby could hear them when they talked to it, pressing their ears against her stomach trying to detect movement. Tom became even more responsible, taking on additional chores without being asked, trying to make things easier for his mother. And Ellie, now 5 years old and more articulate, had decided she would teach the baby everything important once it arrived. "I'll show the baby where all the good mud is," she announced seriously one day. "And which chickens are nice and which ones peck. And how to climb the apple tree even though Mama says not to." "Maybe we'll save the climbing lessons for when the baby's a little older," Clara suggested diplomatically. Winter softened into spring, snow melting to reveal prairie flowers and green grass. Clara's belly swelled unmistakably now, the baby's movements visible from outside, little kicks and rolls that fascinated everyone. Dr. Morrison pronounced himself satisfied with her progress during his monthly visits, though he reminded her constantly to be cautious, to rest, to not overdo it. As her due date approached, Clara found herself cycling through every emotion imaginable. Excitement about meeting this new life she and Wyatt had created, terror about the delivery itself, about the very real possibility of complications, guilt about the time and attention she'd have to divert from her other children, gratitude for Wyatt's steadfast support, for the life they'd built, for having made it this far. On a warm May morning, with meadowlarks singing and the scent of sage heavy in the air, Clara's labor began. She woke to familiar cramping, felt the first contractions grip her belly, and knew the time had come. "Wyatt," she said quietly, touching his shoulder. "It's starting." He was awake immediately, fear and determination warring on his face. "Are you sure? Maybe it's false labor, maybe—" "It's not false labor. I've done this 4 times before, remember? This is the real thing." Wyatt moved into action with impressive efficiency. He sent Tom riding hell for leather to fetch Mrs. Patterson and to send a telegram to Dr. Morrison. He settled the younger children with Mary, who'd come early knowing this day was imminent. He prepared the bedroom according to Mrs. Patterson's previous instructions, boiled water, gathered clean linens, did everything right with shaking hands that betrayed his terror. Mrs. Patterson arrived within the hour, her weathered face calm and competent. She examined Clara and nodded approvingly. "You're progressing well, honey. First babies from new marriages often come fast. I'd say you've got maybe 6-8 hours ahead of you."
6 to 8 hours of pain, of risk, of walking the line between life and death. Clara tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong, tried to focus on the fact that she'd survived this 4 times before, that medical science had advanced, that she had helped this time instead of managing alone. But as the contractions intensified and the hours dragged on, fear crept in despite her best efforts. The pain was familiar but no less overwhelming for its familiarity. Her body knew what to do, but that didn't make the process any less violent, any less frightening. And when Mrs. Patterson's expression shifted from calm to concerned midway through the afternoon, Claire's fear crystallized into genuine terror. "What's wrong?" she gasped between contractions. "Nothing's wrong yet," Mrs. Patterson said carefully, "but the baby's positioned oddly. Not breech, but not quite right either. We may need to help things along a bit." Dr. Morrison arrived shortly after sunset, having ridden hard from Helena when he received the telegram. He took one look at the situation and his face went serious. "Wyatt," he said firmly, "I need you outside." "No," Clara said, her voice breaking. "Don't send him away. I need him here." The doctor hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but you stay up by her head, hold her hands, keep her calm. Can you do that?" Wyatt moved immediately to Clara's side, taking her hands in his, pressing kisses to her forehead. "I'm right here," he whispered. "I'm not going anywhere. You're going to be fine, you hear me? You're going to be just fine." But as the night wore on and the baby refused to come, as Clara's strength waned and the bleeding started, not catastrophic but definitely more than normal, even Wyatt's reassurances couldn't mask the very real danger she was in. "We need to get this baby out now," Dr. Morrison said grimly. "Clara, I need you to push harder than you've ever pushed before. On the next contraction, everything you've got. Can you do that?" Clara was beyond words, beyond everything except pain and exhaustion and fear. But she heard the urgency in the doctor's voice, felt Wyatt's hands gripping hers like lifelines, and found some reserve of strength she hadn't known she possessed. When the next contraction hit, she pushed with everything she had. Pushed until she felt something tear inside, pushed until black spots danced across her vision, pushed until a baby's cry pierced the air, thin and indignant and absolutely, perfectly alive. "It's a boy," Mrs. Patterson announced, her voice thick with relief. "A healthy boy with good lungs." Clara collapsed back against the pillows, barely conscious, vaguely aware of Dr. Morrison working quickly to stop the bleeding, of Mrs. Patterson cleaning and swaddling the baby, of Wyatt's face above hers streaked with tears. "You did it," he was saying, over and over like a prayer. "You did it, Clara. You're okay. You're both okay." "The baby?" Clara managed to whisper. "He's perfect. Absolutely perfect. Here, let me—" Wyatt carefully took the bundled infant from Mrs. Patterson and laid him in Clara's arms. She looked down at her son, their son, and felt her heart expand impossibly. He was tiny and red and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would probably turn blue like his father's. He looked like possibility, like hope, like every good thing they'd built together made manifest in flesh and blood and new life. "Noah," Clara whispered, the name coming to her without thought. "Like the ark, the promise after the flood." "Noah Coulter," Wyatt agreed, his voice breaking. "It's perfect." The children were allowed in shortly after, creeping into the room with wide eyes and hushed voices. They crowded around the bed, staring in wonder at their new brother. "He's so small," Tom breathed. "Was I that small?" Ellie asked. "You were all that small once," Clara confirmed tiredly. "Tom, do you want to hold him?" She watched her children take turns holding their brother, watched their faces transform with wonder and love, and felt a contentment so profound it was almost painful. This was her family, all 7 of them now, bound together by blood and choice and love that had survived loss to bloom again. Dr. Morrison declared her stable before he left, though he warned she'd need weeks of recovery before she was back to normal. Mrs. Patterson stayed for 3 days, teaching Mary how to care for both baby and mother, making sure everything was healing properly. And Wyatt barely left Clara's side, sleeping in a chair beside the bed, waking at Noah's every cry, doing everything possible to ease Clara's recovery. The weeks that followed were a blur of exhaustion and joy. Noah was a good baby, relatively quiet, nursing well, sleeping in stretches that were just long enough to keep Clara from complete collapse. The older children adjusted to having an infant in the house with surprising grace, even when Noah's crying woke them at night, even when he demanded constant attention that had previously been theirs. One evening, about 6 weeks after Noah's birth, Clara stood on the porch watching her family. Wyatt was teaching Tom how to rope, the lasso spinning in awkward circles while both of them laughed. The twins were playing some elaborate game involving sticks and imagination. Ellie was showing Noah, who was far too young to appreciate it, her collection of interesting rocks. And inside, Mary was preparing supper, filling the house with the smell of cooking food and the sound of domestic contentment. Clara rested her hand on the porch railing, feeling the solid wood beneath her palm, and marveled at how far she'd come. 3 years ago, she'd been a desperate widow convinced she'd never be happy again, that survival was the best she could hope for. Now she had a husband who loved her, 6 children who were thriving, a home that felt safe and warm, and a future stretching ahead full of possibility. "What are you thinking about?" Wyatt asked, appearing beside her with Noah in his arms. The baby was asleep, his tiny face peaceful, and seeing them together made Clara's throat tight with emotion. "I'm thinking about second chances," Clara said softly. "About how I thought my life was over when James died, but it was really just beginning a new chapter. About how you appeared exactly when I needed you, like some kind of answer to prayers I was too scared to voice." "I was thinking the same thing," Wyatt admitted, "about how I'd convinced myself I'd never be happy again after Sarah, that the best I could hope for was just getting through each day. And then I met you, and suddenly there was hope again. Purpose. A reason to build something lasting." They stood together in the golden evening light, baby Noah sleeping between them, while their other children played and laughed and lived the secure childhood Clara had fought so hard to provide. Out on the prairie, storms would come and go. They always did. There would be hard years and lean times, illness and setback, and all the challenges life inevitably brought. But inside this house, this home they'd built together from broken pieces, there was warmth enough for everyone. Love enough for all 7 of them, and more besides. "Thank you," Clara said finally, "for making room for us. For all 5 of us." 6, Wyatt corrected gently, nodding at Noah. "Now it's 6. 6, Clara agreed, smiling through the tears that had started to slip down her cheeks. "Our family of 6. But even as she said it, she knew the number didn't really matter. Whether 5 or 6 or eventually more, whether born to them or adopted, whether blood relatives or chosen family, the important thing was that they had each other, that they'd found the courage to risk love again after loss, to hope again after despair, to build again after destruction. Years would pass. The children would grow. Noah would take his first steps, speak his first words, join his siblings in the chaos and joy of childhood. Tom would grow into a fine young man who'd eventually run the ranch alongside his father. The twins would maintain their special bond even as they developed into distinct individuals. Ellie would remain the family's free spirit, always finding adventure in ordinary moments. And eventually, there would be more children. Another daughter 2 years after Noah, adopted twin boys from a wagon train that met tragedy, until the Coulter house rang constantly with noise and life and love. But all of that was still to come. For now, on this perfect spring evening in 1876, Clara Coulter stood on her porch with her husband and her sleeping infant surrounded by the sounds of her older children's laughter, and felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Pure, uncomplicated peace. She'd survived the wilderness years, she'd endured loss and loneliness, and the particular desperation of carrying too much alone. She'd been the widow everyone pitied, the single mother everyone judged, the woman too proud or too scared or too stubborn to ask for help. But she wasn't that woman anymore. She was Clara Coulter, wife, mother, partner, woman who'd learned that accepting love wasn't weakness, but the greatest strength of all. Woman who'd discovered that second chances were real, that hope was justified, that happiness wasn't a betrayal of the past, but a celebration of survival. As the sun set over the Montana Territory, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose and purple, Clara leaned against her husband's shoulder and whispered a prayer of gratitude to whatever divine providence had brought them together. She'd been so certain her story was over, that the best chapters were behind her, that nothing good could grow from such barren soil. She'd been wrong, and she'd never been happier to be wrong about anything in her life. The prairie wind carried the scent of sage and possibility. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to the emerging stars. Inside the house, Mary was setting the table for 8 because family meals required room for everyone now. The lamps were lit, casting golden light through the windows. Home, Clara thought. This was home in the truest, deepest sense. Not just a place, but a feeling, a state of being, a truth that lived in the heart rather than any structure of wood and stone. She'd found her way through the darkness.
She'd reached the other side of grief. And here, bathed in the warm glow of evening light with her family surrounding her, Clara finally understood what she'd been fighting toward all along. Not survival, not just endurance, but life itself. Full and rich and complicated and beautiful. Life with all its mess and magic, its heartbreak and healing, its endless capacity to surprise you with joy when you'd least expect it. Clara Boone was gone, buried with the past she'd escaped. In her place stood Clara Coulter, and she was exactly who she was supposed to be. Strong enough to accept help. Brave enough to love again. Wise enough to know that the best gift she could give her children wasn't perfection, but presence. Not fearlessness, but hope. The story that had begun with desperation and ended in joy was complete. But really it wasn't an ending at all. It was just the beginning of everything that came after, all the years and moments and memories still waiting to be made. And as Clara carried Noah inside to join the rest of their family for supper, she looked back one final time at the prairie, stretching endless under the darkening sky, and she smiled. She'd made it home at last,